Hello, everyone. How are you doing this evening? Glad to be here with you tonight. What a wonderful evening. I've got a very interesting topic to discuss with you today. Now, those of you who are regulars here, always make sure that you're subscribed. Always make sure that you hit the notifications bell so that you get the notifications. Hit the like button. If you can post this on your Facebook, post this on your Reddit, post this on your Twitter, spread the word. We want this to be a big community who joins us this evening for a great conversation. I'm very excited to be with you here tonight. And for those of you who are new, I say welcome, welcome. Be sure to subscribe. A lot to talk about tonight. A lot going on in the country, and I have some specific information that I think is rather important that we should discuss. I'll get right to that. So as folks pile on in, hey bro, how's your night? How's my night? Well, couldn't get any better. Just did a great interview with Dakota Lilly. Dakota Lilly is a Venezuela solidarity activist who's just had his Twitter account suspended. He went on the Tucker Carlson show to defend Venezuela, KPD, SPD relations. Writing it down in Weimar, Germany. Writing it down. So I'll be posting that shortly after our talk here tonight. And that'll be good. The way we do things is I'll give you my opening remarks. And after I give my opening remarks, then from there we will jump right into the roll call. And then from there, I will start answering your super chats. So, let's just jump right into it. Plenty of unnamed orange beverage. Got some water if I run out of that. Alrighty, folks. So Donald Trump is naming Amy Coney Barrett as his Supreme Court nominee to fill the shoes of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. First debate between Biden and Trump is scheduled for this Tuesday. A lot going on. Now, a lot is being made in the media about the fact that Amy Coney Barrett is Roman Catholic, like Brett Kavanaugh, but not only is Amy Coney Barrett a Roman Catholic, but she is a member of a Trotsky Western spy. Writing it down. I'll get to that. Not only is Amy Coney Barrett a Roman Catholic, but she is a member of a parachurch organization. Books on KPD, SPD relations. Now, this parachurch organization that Amy Coney Barrett is a member of, People of Praise, is an attempt to combine charismatic Christian practices, such as speaking in tongues, with Roman Catholic theology. Now, what's interesting about all of this is that this kind of gets to a theme that I've been talking about on these lives, if you've been paying attention. The United States is looking a lot more like the Roman Empire, right? And in the Roman Empire, one key aspect of the empire was what they called the mysteries, the mystery cults, the mystery religions. In the Roman Empire, they had the official gods they worshipped: Jupiter, Saturn, Venus, etc. But among certain jobs, there were certain cults that you were a member of if you had a certain job. For example, among the navy of Rome and the sailors of Rome, there was a cult of a certain god of the ocean that they worshipped. They had secret practices that the Roman navy engaged in. They had specific teachings, and it wasn't available to the general public. You had to be part of the Roman navy, the Roman, sea-bound ships, in order to be at all familiar with these beliefs. Okay, writing it down. Appointing myself president. Alrighty. So, among other sections of the Roman Empire, they had different cults. For example, there was cults imported from Egypt that were quite popular. There were cults imported from Persia that were quite popular. There, in certain military orders, sections of the military would have their own religion, basically. But these religions were not available to the public. It wasn't like anybody could just join these groups, and what their beliefs were not widely known either. They were certain members of the state apparatus, the navy, the military. They had certain religious beliefs that were only practiced by people in that specific profession in the state, and they were hidden from most of the people within Rome. Most of the people in Rome were not familiar with the beliefs of the mystery religions. Now, in the United States right now, this Power of Praise, or the People of Praise organization, is not the first very strange religious group that has influence over sections of our government. For example, a lot has been written about a group they call either the Family, or the Fellowship, or the International Foundation. And this is a very secretive religious group that convenes the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. They have a lot of influence among politicians, Democrats, Republicans. Hillary Clinton had a relationship with them. A lot of Republicans have a relationship with them. And it's a Christian group, and their teachings basically are that the Bible was altered in order to teach compassion for the poor, kindness. They argue that the Bible has somehow been altered and distorted to be socialist, and that Jesus was a believer in laissez-faire capitalism. That's what the Fellowship believes. Now, the Fellowship, it's not a very public religion. Most people in the United States never heard of it until recently, until it was publicized. It's a religion that only kind of courts very wealthy and powerful people and politicians. Another interesting fact is that the Mormon Church, right, the Church of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, have a huge amount of influence among the FBI and the CIA. The Mormons are a strange aspect of U.S. history. We know that they were started in New England, they were driven to Ohio, and then they were driven to Missouri, and then eventually they set up shop in Utah, and Utah was then brought into the United States. They were a religious group. They believed that this man, Joseph Smith, found some golden plates. Well, in about the 70s, starting in about this 1970s, they started to make inroads into the FBI and the CIA. And they're highly influential. And Mitt Romney, he was a member of the Mormon Church, a lifelong Mormon, and he was the Republican Party's nominee for president in 2012 against Barack Obama. We also know that on Capitol Hill, there is a group called Capitol Ministries. It is a specific church group that only works with government officials on Capitol Hill. And it is led by a former basketball player named Ralph Droldinger, a former professional basketball player. And if you are an elected official, if you're a Republican on Capitol Hill, you can get invited to join Mike Pence and some other officials, government officials, for what they call the Members Bible Study, which is an exclusive, very quiet, invitation only Bible study event that Mike Pence and other Republicans and other Democrats attend, led by Ralph Drollinger, the former basketball player. And very interesting. None of these religious groups, People of Praise. Anyone ever hear People of Praise? No. People of Praise is very obscure. Now, some people say People of Praise started contemporary Christian rock music, that they're kind of responsible for starting that. And that, it's kind of a bizarre mixture because most Catholics are not speaking in tongues. Most Catholics are not singing rock and roll music. So it's a very strange, but People of Praise is pretty obscure. But it could be that the next Supreme Court justice could be a member. The Fellowship, very, very secretive. The Fellowship, the family, the International Foundation, very, very secretive. People know about the National Prayer Breakfast. People do not know about the Fellowship. Mormons are widely known in the United States. They're a big fixture of U.S. society. But until about the 1950s and 60s, being a Mormon in the United States was not very well respected. Mormons were considered to be a crazy, dangerous cult. They were only in Utah. But starting in the 50s and 60s, they suddenly started to be more and more mainstreamed and started to have influence within the U.S. government apparatus, and their number of converts gradually started to expand. Capital Ministries, who are they, right? Ralph Drollinger, former basketball player. These are all Christian groups. But it's not just Christian groups that have this kind of weird influence among our elected officials. For example, we all know about Al Gore. Al Gore was the vice president to Bill Clinton. Al Gore, not only was he the vice president to Bill Clinton, but he lost the 2000 election to George W. Bush. He then went on to become a global warming activist. He made the film The Inconvenient Truth. Al Gore's spiritual advisor was Marilyn Ferguson. Marilyn Ferguson. And she was a New Age spiritual guru and medium, Marilyn Ferguson. And she personally advised Al Gore. And she wrote a book called The Aquarian Conspiracy. Hey, we're back. Wow. What happened there? Don't know. I guess fans of Marilyn Ferguson used their voodoo magic to stop our live. I'm just kidding. But Marilyn Ferguson was the spiritual advisor to Al Gore. She wrote this book called The Aquarian Conspiracy. She was not a Christian. She was a New Age spiritual guru. But she had quite a bit of influence. Now, many people may also be aware of the fact that I think it was in the 2000s, right? I think 2003, 2004, around that time, in a congressional office meeting, in a congressional office on Capitol Hill, right? In a congressional office building on Capitol Hill, like right near the U.S. Capitol. They had a ceremony on Capitol Hill where multiple members of Congress gathered to crown Reverend Sun Myung Moon, the bizarre pastor from South Korea who leads the cult known as the Moonies. They crowned Reverend Sun Myung Moon to be the King of Peace, and members of the U.S. Congress put a crown onto the head of this Korean man who claims to be Jesus's second coming. So it's very interesting, right? A lot is written about Rasputin, right? If you read any history of the Russian Revolution, you'll know about Rasputin. Rasputin was this monk in Russia who apparently, had, quite a bit of charisma, and the Tsar and the Tsar's family, he was hired to kind of, do some like weird faith healing stuff with the Tsar's family. And it became kind of a scandal, and a lot of Europe was making fun of Russia because of Rasputin. Well, it seems like there's quite a bit of Rasputin kind of stuff going on in the United States at this time. People of Praise, the Fellowship, Mormonism, Capital Ministries, Ralph Drollinger, Members Bible Study, Marilyn Ferguson, Paul Cockshot, writing it down. And that seems to be the situation that we've got. It's very bizarre. And what's interesting is that it kind of shows a layer of distance between the U.S. public and elected officials, right? There are plenty of religious people in the United States. They tend to be Roman Catholic or Baptist or Methodist. There's an increasing number of Muslims in the United States. There's an increasing number of, there are different religious groups in the United States, but it seems like increasingly we are starting to see elected officials who affiliate themselves to bizarre religious groups. And that there are bizarre religious groups and bizarre religious spiritual teachers. Christian religious extremism in Southeast Asia. Christian. There are some bizarre religious groups that are affiliating themselves and marketing themselves to elected officials. It's an ongoing trend in the United States, and it's very strange, and it's worth looking into. It's very, very much looking, looking to be a little bit strange. Okay, I just wanted to comment on that because the liberal folks are very up in arms about fighting against Amy Coney Barrett. Meanwhile, the conservative folks are very fired up to get her on the Supreme Court. It's going to be an ugly fight on Capitol Hill, and I just thought I might draw attention to it. Now, another thing I thought I might mention is that folks will remember that Brett Kavanaugh, who was the other Supreme Court justice nominated by Donald Trump. He went through, he was confirmed after, some very, very intense testimony, a woman who claimed he had attempted to rape her. Brett Kavanaugh was Roman Catholic. Amy Coney Barrett is Roman Catholic, but she's also part of this parachurch organization. And what's interesting is that the Roman Catholic Church at this point is in a pretty left-wing mode. The Pope does not care for Donald Trump and has made that very clear. The Pope is very, very much in support of immigrants and migrants. The Pope, criticizes capitalism. Pope Francis is very, very much in a left mode and has been very, very critical of Donald Trump and of the Republican Party. However, it seems like there is a layer of Roman Catholics in the United States who are not in agreement with the Roman Catholic Church, with the Vatican, but do network among each other. There is a Roman Catholic newspaper that these folks are affiliated with. What's interesting is if you go to urban areas in the United States, like I noticed this, right? When I was in Cleveland, I used to go to court with police brutality victims. And every judge, it seemed, in Cleveland had an Irish name. McDonough, it was, every judge seemed to have an Irish name. And every high-ranking police officer in Cleveland, it seemed, also had an Irish name. A lot of them had bright red hair, like me. In New York City, the higher echelons of the police department and of the judges and the prosecutors tend to be Irish and Italian as well. And that urban Roman Catholics are a significant faction within the local policing agencies and local courts and local prosecutors around the country, in urban areas most specifically. There's that old stereotype of the Irish cop in New York City. I mean, up to today, when you see a police van go by, everyone, even still today, refers to a police van as a, quote, paddy wagon. Right? And that refers to, it actually comes back to a group of slave catchers. They were Irish guys that were hired to be slave catchers. They were called paddy rollers. They call it a paddy wagon, right? And if you watch old movies, like from the 1930s and 40s, the police officer has always got an Irish accent because he's a police officer, the police officer is always, got a brogue. This is a layer of people in the United States, and the Democratic Party, let me add, is very Roman Catholic as well. John F. Kennedy was the first Roman Catholic president, and he was, an Irish Catholic himself. And his family, interestingly enough, the Kennedy family, they were bootleggers. They made bootlegged alcohol during Prohibition in Boston. They were kind of like the leaders of alcohol, illegal alcohol in Boston, and eventually moved into Boston politics. And so, the Democratic Party tends to have a lot of Roman Catholics. But the policing agencies, increasingly local police departments in major cities and in small towns, right? Philadelphia, Chicago, New York City, but even in smaller towns, are increasingly Republican and aligned with Donald Trump, right? The New York City Police Department, the NYPD, is at this point pretty much in open warfare with the elected government here in New York City. They have cut the budget of the police department. The police are furious about it. They are angry at Bill de Blasio. There's almost, people talk about like there's hints of maybe a police strike or something like that. The New York City Police Department is pretty pro-Trump and pretty anti the elected city council and mayor of New York. Around the country, we see local police departments and local prosecutors that seem to be in line with the president. And, while the cities that they're in tend to be run by Democrats, the police departments tend to be lining up with Republicans. And in New York City, this predates Trump for a long time, right? New York City, there are two like daily tabloid newspapers, right? There's the New York Daily News and the New York Post. The New York Daily News tends to be the Democratic Party newspaper. The New York Post tends to be the right-wing conservative paper. And the New York Post is very much the newspaper of not just Republicans in the United States or in New York City, but it's also the newspaper of the NYPD. They tend to publish a lot of things about the NYPD. Their reporting is very, very much slanted in favor of the police department. Many people have argued that. The New York Post is almost the NYPD Post, people have talked about. Whereas New York Daily News tends to, it tends to be a little more liberal, right? And that, the New York City Police Department, the NYPD, and the Republican Party and Donald Trump all seem to be kind of lined up, and that there is an overrepresentation of Irish and Italian Catholics in the police departments around the country, especially in urban centers. And there is a layer of U.S. Roman Catholics who are very, very conservative, right? And don't approve of the Democratic Party. And people talk about, what's the guy from Pennsylvania? I can't remember his name. A conservative Roman Catholic representative from Pennsylvania, Rick Santorum. It's quite interesting because there is a liberal Democratic Party Catholic tradition. There's the whole thing with Al Smith, right? The leader of the New York City Democratic Party was a Catholic Irish man named Al Smith. And when he ran for president during the 1920s, he lost, and the main argument against him was that he was a Roman Catholic, he'd be loyal to a foreign government, and the Republicans whipped up so much anti-Catholic hysteria that he lost the election. Al Smith did. And then eventually Al Smith turned against Franklin Roosevelt and argued that Franklin Roosevelt was a communist. He set up the American Liberty League. He was very close to a lot of fascists. But still, to this day in New York City, they have the Al Smith dinner to honor Al Smith. And Al Smith is remembered as one of the influential figures in New York City politics. He's considered to be just a hero of Tammany Hall and of the New York City Democratic Party. But he was a Democrat, but he turned against Roosevelt, arguing that Roosevelt was a communist, and he started the American Liberty League, which had ties to fascist groups, and eventually was tied to the America First Committee, which was a group that wanted to prevent the United States from entering the Second World War, and was later proven to be funded by Nazi Germany, and had ties to the German-American Bund, and so there is this layer. And what's interesting is most urban Irish Catholics and most urban Italian Catholics and most urban Catholics in the United States in general probably are Democrats. Rural Catholics, different story. There are a lot of very conservative rural Catholics. But urban Democrats that are urban Catholics that are in cities, right? Urban Catholics, they tend to be Democrats, right? But then the question is, with this new divide between the policing agencies, with the policing agencies increasingly being at odds with the Democratic Party, with defund the police becoming a big talking point of the Democratic Party, it seems that this is what's going on. That Brett Kavanaugh and now Amy Coney Barrett. Now, Amy Coney Barrett, she's from South Bend, Indiana. And what's interesting is that there is a very well known, very 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 right wing Catholic writer from South Bend, Indiana, Dr. E. Michael Jones. Now, what's interesting is E. Michael Jones is so right wing and so anti-Semitic that he actually, because he's so right wing and so anti-Semitic, you said Iran, I wrote it down. Because of that, he ends up taking a lot of anti-imperialist positions. He defends the Islamic Republic of Iran. He will defend Russia. He appears on Press TV and gives interviews to them. And he is very critical of capitalism from the right. He is a far right-wing, what you might call a traditionalist Catholic or something like that. He lives in South Bend, Indiana also. That is where he is based out of. And he has a magazine called Culture Warrior. And Dr. E. Michael Jones is actually linked to Pat Buchanan. Apparently, Pat Buchanan and E. Michael Jones know each other and speak frequently, according to some reports. So, E. Michael Jones was banned from YouTube and from Amazon recently. And he's known to really, really say some really pretty blatantly anti-Semitic stuff. He has a lot of knowledge about world history. He has a lot of knowledge about different things around the world, and he does take some anti-imperialist stances. He's very anti-Israel, but I mean, he's also really blatantly anti-Semitic, very anti-gay, very anti-abortion. So it's very interesting, and you wonder what's going on here. Rome is moving in a more and more liberal direction with Pope Francis, but it seems like Donald Trump doesn't just want to appoint a conservative judge. It seems like Donald Trump wants to kind of raise up this layer of conservative Catholic cops, judges, and prosecutors. There is a Roman Catholic conservative right-wing layer among cops, judges, and prosecutors that Trump is making a point of reaching out to. I think that that's very, very interesting. Now, how specifically does People of Praise fit into this? Apparently, there was a report going around that People of Praise, this group that Amy Coney Barrett is tied to, that's who *Handmaid's Tale*, the left-wing feminist novel was dystopian novel was based on, and now there's many people coming out and disputing that and saying that is simply not accurate. That *Handmaid's Tale* has got nothing to do with People of Praise. So it's very, very interesting. As we're trying to understand the elites of the United States, trying to understand why they act the way they do, it's worth looking into all of this. Now, I mentioned Marilyn Ferguson, who was the spiritual advisor to Al Gore, Vice President Al Gore, and such. And Marilyn Ferguson, her book, the Aquarian Conspiracy, which I talk about in my Synthetic Left video, it's an environmentalist book. It is a book, that very much plays up the idea of overpopulation. It's interesting because now, in light of the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a lot of conservatives are trying to, trash Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I mean, I don't want to do that. I'm not a fan of hers. I mean, that she was pretty much just a more liberal imperialist, more liberal administrator of the U.S. capitalist state. Made a lot of rulings that I didn't particularly care for, but, better than some of the other judges. But there's a quote from her going around where she talks about Roe versus Wade and why it was necessary because of, quote-unquote, overpopulation. And there's a quote of hers where she's using Malthusian language to justify the Roe versus Wade ruling. Now, that obviously doesn't discredit the right of a woman to an abortion. That obviously, doesn't prove that abortion is some vast Malthusian conspiracy, which is what the right wing might argue, and that's not what I'm saying here. But it is quite interesting, right? And we know that Malthusian thinking was a motivation for a lot of things. Do we need higher taxes, or do we need to rethink the way we spend money now? Taxes, money, spending. All right. So, a lot is going on here. Now, we know that the Rockefellers were big funders of Planned Parenthood, which is now before it was Planned Parenthood, it was the Birth Control League headed by Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger was she extolled a lot of racist Malthusian ideas. We also know that the Rockefellers were big funders of the research of Alfred Kinsey and the Kinsey Report, which was one of the was a big turning point in the American sexual revolution. It was this report on human sexuality that was widely circulated. So, there are different viewpoints within the elites. There are very, very different viewpoints within the elites of the United States. There are very, very different views. And that's just something we should be aware of. I mean, if we're going to understand how U.S. society works, right? It's not enough. It is not enough. Let me repeat this. It is not enough to simply say the U.S. system is capitalist. All of the leaders of the USA are capitalists. What we need is a socialist revolution. It's not enough, right? Those of us who are serious about all of this want to know who is who among the elite. We want to know what financial entities and economic entities they're tied to, what their real agendas may be, why they're doing what they are doing. And so it's important for us to know, not just about Betsy DeVos and the military-industrial complex and Bernie Marcus and Sheldon Adelson, not just about Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, right, and Silicon Valley. It's not just important to know about the Rockefellers, but it's also important to keep track of the Rasputins on Capitol Hill, the People of Praise, the Fellowship, the Mormons, the Capitol Ministries, Marilyn Ferguson, right? That this stuff is very, very important to keep track of, because at the end of the day, right, the people who whisper into the ears of our elected officials have far more to say directly about what may happen than the elected officials do. The elected officials are going to come out and they're going to do a song and dance that will get them elected. They smile for the cameras. They say very carefully written statements that make everybody happy. But if you want to know what kind of conversations are going on in the back room, and if you want to know what the agendas in the back room are, don't look at the elected officials themselves. Look at the people whispering in their ear, right? Look at the people whispering in the ear of elected officials. Look at the people that are prompting elected officials to act in one way or another, right? We know at this point that it's being rumored, I think it's confirmed, that if Joe Biden wins the presidency, he will, David Harvey, all right, he will, if confirmed, if elected, Joe Biden is going to name Michelle Flournoy, I don't know what the correct pronunciation is. He will name her as Secretary of Defense. And many liberals are looking at that and saying, wow, the first woman Secretary of Defense. Isn't that amazing? But if you look into Michelle Flournoy's background, she is a neoconservative. She comes out of that Sovietology field that John Bolton comes out of. She comes out of that field that the neocons, Victoria Nuland, all of them come out of, right? Of this kind of Cold Warrior faction. She worked with the Clinton administration to oversee the looting of the former Soviet Union during the 1990s. She was a big supporter of U.S. military intervention in Libya, and she's tied to the faction of the U.S. ruling class that I talk so much about, that was behind the Hillary Clinton State Department, right? That faction, that wrecking crew, that internationalist wrecking crew, the permanent neoliberal revolutionary faction, the Kamala Harris, Samantha Power, Susan Rice, Anne Marie Slaughter, that faction that sees unleashing chaos and unrest across the globe in order to spread neoliberal capitalism across the planet, that faction that Joe Biden and Barack Obama tried to restrain as president, that faction that Tulsi Gabbard was basically used her limited airtime to go after Kamala Harris because of. I talk about all of this in my new book on Kamala Harris. That particular faction will be given control of the U.S. Department of Defense. Michelle Flournoy is part of that grouping. She's in with Samantha Power. She's in with Anne Marie Slaughter. She's in with Kamala Harris. She's in that same grouping that destroyed Libya and killed probably millions of people in Libya by overthrowing the most prosperous country and government in Africa, and creating a crisis of instability in that country. The group that pushed for the destabilization of Syria, and the group that pushed to manipulate the Arab Spring to carry out unrest. Yeah, I mean, this is who Joe Biden is hinting that he will name, and that many people wonder how long Joe Biden would even be president. Right? I mean, Joe Biden may not be president very long because he's so old, and Kamala Harris may be our next president. That's why I wrote that book about Kamala Harris. So if you haven't read it yet, check it out. But I pay attention to all of this. I pay attention to all of this. Now, changing the subject to young person joining the military. All right. Changing the subject to something a little more positive. Nicaragua, right? That's a Central American country where the Sandinistas led a revolution in 1979. The Sandinistas, they started out as a small study group among students in Nicaragua. They had a magazine that people called Issue 1, Volume 1, because every issue of it had a new name, because they would publish one issue of it, and the government censors would see it, and they would ban it. So people started calling it Issue 1, Volume 1, because it was their newspaper. And it was a small group of students, Marxist revolutionary students, who had a magazine, and they would study Marxism. And then there was an earthquake in Nicaragua, where a lot of poor people died. And as a result of this earthquake that happened, a lot of donations were given to Nicaragua to deal with it. And the people that were hit by the earthquake did not get any of the money. The Somoza dictatorship, a military junta backed by the United States in Nicaragua, squandered and stole all the money given to the people of Nicaragua in the time of crisis. And there was massive outrage among the working people of Nicaragua, the working class, the industrial workers, the farmers, about the fact that all the money given to help them during the earthquake was stolen by the brutal military regime. And pretty soon, the Sandinistas exploded in membership, and pretty soon there was an armed guerrilla war in the countryside. And pretty soon, the Sandinistas were seizing power. And eventually, in 1979, you had, the Sandinista government take power in Nicaragua. Now, the Sandinistas were not the official Communist Party of Nicaragua. They were more revolutionary. The official Communist Party of Nicaragua was a little more reformist, was not excited about their activities. But the Sandinistas took power. In 1979, they took power. And they brought in Cuban doctors to provide health care to people in the countryside. They brought in Cuban literacy volunteers to teach people how to read. And the U.S. imperialists and Wall Street and the Pentagon did everything. They threw hell and high water at them, right? The Contra War, they hired these drug-dealing terrorists to go in there and burn healthcare clinics and kill people and mine the harbors to prevent, ships from coming in there. But the Sandinistas held out through that war, and then they had an election in the early 1990s, and in that election, they lost. They lost the election. They were voted out of power, and so they stepped down. They had a peaceful transition. The Sandinistas stepped down. The Sandinistas did, in the 1990s, what Donald Trump, the President of the United States, is not willing to commit to doing right now. Let's talk about this, right? Donald Trump, President of the United States, is not willing to do at this point. He's not saying he's willing to do what the Sandinistas were willing to do. So the next time you hear about Nicaragua being an evil dictatorship because of the Sandinistas, remember, the Sandinistas stepped down peacefully when they lost the elections. Donald Trump, on the other hand, will not say he's going to do that. So Donald Trump and the President of the United States is less democratic than the Sandinistas are. But anyway, moving on. They lost power for a few years after that election. But then in 2006, they took power once again, right? They were elected. Daniel Ortega became the president. And they have done loads to improve the lives of working people in Nicaragua. I mean, they've just done amazing things to improve the lives of working people in Nicaragua. Poverty has dropped very significantly. The GDP has vastly risen by like 30% since they've been in office. That's huge. Huge amounts of poverty alleviation. I mean, the Sandinistas have done amazing things, wiped out illiteracy in the country. They have a program where they enable low-income people in Nicaragua to become micro-entrepreneurs with loans from the state. The state subsidizes, basically, Nicaraguans to start their own businesses. I mean, they have done some really, really amazing stuff. The Sandinistas, their economic record in Nicaragua is very, very good. And of course, that's why in the USA they declare them to be an evil dictatorship. And every time students go out and protest against them or something, whenever that happens, the U.S. media immediately embraces it. Even the last time there was student protests going on, there were drug cartels that were unleashed to be part of the protest that were being violent. But it's just an uprising for democracy. Right? But the Sandinistas have been widely demonized. And what's interesting is the vice president of Nicaragua is the wife of Daniel Ortega. Daniel Ortega is the president, but his wife, Rosario Murillo, she is the vice president. And Rosario Murillo gives kind of these radio speeches that are very ideological, but they're very religious as well. The slogan that you see painted all across Nicaragua, which is the slogan of the Sandinista government, is Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. That's what they believe in: Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. That's the slogan of the government of Nicaragua. And with that slogan, they rule. They've done a lot, not just to promote Christianity, but to promote the teachings, the indigenous religious teachings of Nicaragua as well. They've been building these life trees throughout the country, these metal trees with lights on them, that are kind of the symbol of some indigenous beliefs that the people of Nicaragua practice. And tomorrow in Nicaragua will actually be the National Day of the Bible in Nicaragua. The Sandinista government has declared, as part of their policy of Christianity, socialism, and solidarity, that the last Sunday of September every year is the National Day of the Bible. And so all over Nicaraguan media today, they were showing, various churches and various, government facilities that are preparing to have events to honor the National Day of the Bible. Fascinating stuff, the Sandinistas. And again, because they've had great economic successes, does the media ever point to those economic successes and say, wow, socialism works? No. But you can bet the second there would be any economic problem in Nicaragua, they'd say, see, socialism destroys countries. The bias in American media is very extreme. Now, somebody in the chat mentioned what's also worth mentioning about Nicaragua, which is the Mosquito people, right? There's an indigenous group, there's an area, really, in Nicaragua called the Mosquito Coast. There are some indigenous folks there that don't believe in technology. The majority of the population of Nicaragua are indigenous to some degree or other. However, there are some traditional, tribal, indigenous folks in Nicaragua who do not believe in technology. They still live in, very primitive ways. And those folks, they don't like the Sandinistas because the Sandinistas, want to, bring electricity and build roads and hospitals and stuff like that. So during the 1980s, the CIA started giving weapons to the Mosquito people to fight the Sandinistas. And then they put Russell Means, the leader of the American Indian movement, on an airplane and sent him down to Nicaragua to work with these indigenous groups to make propaganda against the Sandinistas. And this is a big aspect of the synthetic left. And this is a big aspect of CIA manipulation. At the same time that was happening, critical support for places like Belarus and Syria with an anti-modern Russia view. I don't know what that means. But anyway, if you look at it, right? If you look at it, Zbigniew Brzezinski very famously said that when he was trying to, put the Soviet Union into a situation where it sent troops to Afghanistan, what he was doing is he was setting the Afghan trap, and he was giving the Soviet Union a Vietnam. And the late Cold War, starting in after the Vietnam War, from the 70s and 80s, the way the United States began fighting against the Soviet Union was by hijacking leftist aesthetics. And that's what they did in the Contra War, as they were making propaganda to try and convince Americans and try and convince people around the world the Sandinista socialist government was bad. They hijacked left-wing aesthetics. They found an indigenous group they claimed was being persecuted by this white Marxist, college worth it, this white Marxist Sandinista group, right? They found an indigenous leader from the United States and flew him all the way down to Nicaragua to make propaganda, right? And so, in their effort to work against the Sandinista government, the U.S. imperialists were adopting left aesthetics. And that was part of Zbigniew Brzezinski's strategy of, manipulating leftists against each other and manipulating communist countries against each other, strategic disengagement. So it's worth noting that as well. But since we were talking about religious groups that among the American elite that are maneuvering, I thought I'd mention the Sandinistas because of their religious affiliation. It's very, very interesting. So I just thought I would mention that. And on that note, folks, I think we will open it up for our roll call. So names and locations, folks. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. And after the roll call, I'll start answering your super chats. Names and locations. Belize, Joey, San Jose. Hello from Australia, Treasure Coast, Florida, Richmond, Virginia. I'm in the CPUSA, Mobile, Alabama, PRC, Georgia, Mumbai, Richmond, Norfolk, Virginia, Milwaukee, Liverpool, United Kingdom, Massachusetts, Robert in Connecticut, Orlando, Florida, Washington State, Australia, Arizona, Scotty from South Carolina, Lionfire, Chicago. Hello, Minas Gerais in Brazil, Astoria, Oregon, Alex Giovanni in Salem, Oregon, Shanghai, China, Cleveland Pirate, Anthony Penza, Sydney, Australia, Washington, D.C., Dan from Pennsylvania, Lena in Los Angeles, Gabe in Pinellas County, Florida, St. David's, Bermuda. Bless up, Caleb. Thank you. Who else is with us here tonight? Palo Round Mountain, California, Rio de Janeiro, Houston, Maryland, Brisbane, Australia, Mo in Pomona, California, SoCal Gang, JT24 in Mississippi, Denver, Colorado, Mohsen from Iran, Pennsylvania, USA. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Newcastle upon Tyne, Abjol, Joe Gale in Nassau County, Arthur in Elwood City, Cincinnati, Ohio, Jenny Lynn. Welcome, 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 welcome. Northern California, and thank you, Caleb. New Jersey, Dust James in North Carolina. Wilmington, California. Gateshead near Castle. Brisbane. New York represent, says Dan Brito. Third Rock from the Sun, says Solomon. Elwood City. Garbagool. I don't know where Garbagool is. Welcome, folks. Haven't done so already, tweet this out. Bring your friends, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Make this a bigger conversation. Nathan in Utah, Norwalk, Iowa, Milky Way Galaxy, Los Angeles. Welcome, folks. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If you haven't invited all your friends to join us here on Saturday night for our great conversation, now is a great time to do that. Be sure to hit the notifications bell so that you find out about all these lives that we do. I know a lot of people complain they don't get the notifications. Sydney in Australia, Naples, Florida, Jordan from the Deep South, David from Italy. Wow. Wow, we've got people in Australia, we got people in Italy. Wow, wow. We are coast to coast, globe to globe. Wow. Utah. Lovely, folks. Lovely, lovely times. So I've got some super chats here to get through. Charlie from Ottawa. Very good, Charlie. Glad you're with us, Charlie from Ottawa. Alrighty. All right. Glendale, California. Saturday night, it's Sunday, says Aquila Rossa. Well, there you go. All right. Books on KPD, SPD relations in Weimar, Germany. Well, there's some good biographies of Ernst Thälmann out there, which I do recommend. There's one book I have it's like a study of Ernst Thälmann, who was the leader of the German Communist Party, how he was portrayed. There's also a book called Beating the Fascists, I believe it's called, that is an academic study of the Communist Party in Weimar, Germany, and their street fighting with the Nazis. And it's an academic study. It's very, very good. Of course, I would recommend History of the Three Internationals by William Z. Foster. I would recommend, there are some old pamphlets from the Communist Party. There's a lot of material out there. There's quite a bit of material out there on the history of Germany. There's a book called The History of the German Republic, and it's by a Trotskyist, but it is a history of the Weimar Republic, the history of the German Republic, which I read, which is very good. So yeah, there are a number of books out there. I hope that answers your question. Was Trotsky a Western spy? I don't think so. No, I think that Trotsky was he was a Russian leftist figure. He had a crush on the West. He was a Marxist, but he refused to become a Bolshevik. When Lenin formed the Party of New Type, he did not agree to form it. He instead tried to form something called the August Bloc, which failed. He had a group of followers. They were just called the Trotskyists. He was a very good orator and speaker. He spoke English and Russian and a number of other languages. Very good writer. He lived in New York City for a long time. When the Russian Revolution happened, he went back to Russia. And in July of 1917, Lenin let him join the Bolsheviks, and he was with the Bolsheviks. When the Russian Revolution happened, he was a Bolshevik and he was a leader. And during the Russian Civil War, because Trotsky was a good speaker, he was a very, very good speaker. They gave him this really crazy costume that he wore, where he had this like hat with a visor on it, and he had this long coat, and he wore leather pants. Okay, all right. Syria, Belarus, Russia. All right. And he wore leather pants, and he went from military camp to military camp, giving these fiery speeches about the revolution. And he had like a gold watch, and he would pick out one soldier and give them a gold watch, and he would give these crazy, like, really, really emotional speeches. He was kind of the propaganda man for the Red Army. A lot of people will say, well, Trotsky won the Russian Civil War. He was the military leader. No, Trotsky was the front man he was the spokesperson for the Red Army. He would go to Red Army camp, from Red Army camp to Red Army camp, firing up the troops with these super emotional speeches. One story that I heard about Trotsky during the Russian Revolution, or during the Russian Civil War, is that apparently one thing that they would do is that before Trotsky would arrive, they would plan this. The soldiers wouldn't know about it. There'd be people who tried to desert from the Red Army. Desertion is illegal, right? In most armies, if you desert, they kill you. So they would line up all the deserters like they were going to kill them, and they would line them up and point the guns at them like they were going to kill them, right? And it would be like, ready, set, ready, aim. And then Trotsky would show up and he would say, stop. And he would save their lives. And then he would give a fiery speech and all of that. And it was this very emotional thing to do. And it was all staged, but it was like propaganda. And he would pick out one soldier and give him a gold watch and say that, in the new Russia, everyone gets a gold watch. And that was Trotsky, and he wore this outrageous costume, right? I mean, it was propaganda, right? I mean, it was interesting because people, when they think of propaganda and like guy in military outfit giving amazing speech that's really emotional, and people think of Hitler, right? Nazis stole that from communists, Anyway, that's a whole nother rant. But yeah, so Trotsky, he was the propaganda front man for the Red Army during the Russian Civil War. After the Russian Civil War, there was a debate in Russia about how do they move forward. Trotsky argued that they needed permanent revolution, right? That they should have permanent revolution, right? That the Soviet Union should only function as a temporary military holdout in a global struggle to seize the Western capitalist countries and make them socialist. And he said that because Russia was a poorer country with a peasant majority, it couldn't actually build full socialism. So it should just function as a temporary military holdout in this all-out battle to seize the Western capitalist countries. And so he argued that the military should take over all the country, all the factories, the whole country, the trade unions, everything should be militarized. The military should run the country as part of this idea of permanent revolution. And the USSR should become a military state that would eventually seize control of the rest of the world. Stalin, Bukharin, Zinoviev, most of the Russian communists didn't agree with that. They could tell that the population, right, because during the Russian Civil War, the population had been barricaded, medical care, they couldn't get medical care and stuff like that. The population was not interested in having permanent revolution. So Zinoviev and Bukharin, their position was that they should maintain like the new economic policy, just have free market policies, and basically try to develop the economy to the point that maybe eventually they could have socialism. Stalin took the third position, and Stalin said that you need to have socialism in one country. And under Stalin, with Stalin, he launched the 5-year plans, and he industrialized the Soviet Union, made the Soviet Union into an industrial superpower. He hired a lot of technicians from Western countries, like the father of the Koch brothers, for example. Fred Koch was brought in to help set up the Soviet oil industry. Electricians, engineers, all kinds of Western companies were brought in to have joint ventures with Soviet state manufacturers, and they built, they turned the USSR into into an industrial superpower. Well, Trotsky did not agree with that position, and after he lost the vote, right? He lost. He was voted out, voted down his position. He continued to maneuver inside the USSR and foment unrest. There was like a demonstration where there was a military parade in the Soviet Union, and the Trotskyites were going through the parade, like disrupting it and doing some stuff. So, long story short, Trotsky was exiled out of the country. He went to Turkey, and then he went to France, and then he went to Mexico, and eventually he was assassinated. I don't think he was ever a Western spy. I think he just had a bad position. I think he just had a bad political position. And that when he left the USSR, when he was in exile, at that point, when he was in exile, he was basically a professional anti-communist. That's basically what he was. I mean, he was going around, I was a leader of the Russian Revolution, I was a leader of the Red Army, and I can tell you why Stalin is no good. And that's what he did. I mean, and he still promoted socialism. He still had his belief, Trotskyism, which is like a wing of global communism that's anti-Soviet. But, I don't think Trotsky was right. I think his position of permanent revolution was incorrect. I think it was wrong. The sad thing is that most people that go around calling themselves Trotskyists have no clue about any of what I just said. In their minds, most people that call themselves Trotskyists have it in their minds that Trotsky was a democratic socialist and Stalin was a dictator. I swear, that's what most people who call themselves Trotskyists believe. Well, Trotsky was a democratic socialist, whereas Stalin was an evil dictator. Well, Trotsky was not was not more democratic than Stalin. Let me put it that way, right? Trotsky executed a lot of anarchists. Trotsky was very authoritarian. Trotsky had no problem, overseeing all kinds of political authoritarian methods, right? Trotsky just disagreed with socialism in one country, and instead he wanted to build permanent revolution. And Trotsky very much represented the revolutionary intelligentsia, which is a middle-class strata that emerged following the French Revolution in Europe and has spread all over the world, right? Everywhere, no matter where you go in the world, you're going to find rich middle-class kids who like chaos and destruction and don't like authority, right? It exists everywhere, right? You ever see Les Miserables? Do you hear the people sing? Those kids in the cafes who get their muskets and Les Miserables. The cafes of France, the Europe, Vienna, Greenwich Village politics. They talk about Greenwich Village politics. All over the world now. It used to be only in the Western countries. Now all over the world you have what's called the revolutionary intelligentsia, which is middle-class people, a lot of them youth, but some of them do it for their whole life. There's a lot of older folks who do it. And they just, they are mad at the old order. They want to create something more just. They like chaos, and that's that, right? And they exist, and Marx was among that milieu, and Trotsky was among that milieu. Mao was among that milieu, among Chinese students. Che Guevara was among that milieu as a wealthy Argentine student and his, motorcycle diaries and all that. And that Marxism comes out of the revolutionary intelligentsia. That's just a fact. In the 20th century, Marxism was a wing of the revolutionary intelligentsia. However, over the course of the 20th century, Marxists actually came to power in the Soviet Union and in China and in Cuba and in many places. And when Marxists came to power, they suddenly began to have a very different perspective. When Marxists came to power, they suddenly were not offering chaos, they were offering order and stability and economic security, right? They oversaw construction. They brought people together. They mobilized populations to build up countries, to wipe out illiteracy, to industrialize impoverished countries, etc. And so Marxism, as it left the revolutionary intelligentsia of Europe and became the governments of countries in the developing world, it became a completely different thing. And in some ways, it became much more conservative. Meanwhile, the revolutionary intelligentsia, right, those young people that want chaos and are angry at authority and that milieu became hijacked by capitalism and by imperialism, right? Zbigniew Brzezinski and the CIA's Congress for Cultural Freedom program. And basically at this point, George Soros and the whole color revolution industry and the Hillary Clinton State Department, the revolutionary intelligentsia of the world have been hijacked by imperialism. Meanwhile, the actual existing socialist governments are more conservative. They present themselves as conservative because they're offering people economic security and not chaos, right? The revolutionary intelligentsia loves chaos. The socialist governments tend to offer stability. So politics in the Western world has completely, politics on a global stage has completely shifted around. The Stalin-Trotsky split was the beginning of that shift. And that is the thesis, right? I'll plug it. I've plugged it many times. My book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, is all about this. The opening essay, I go over this, right? The revolutionary intelligentsia has been hijacked to serve imperialism, and socialism at this point, socialism needs to be a constructive socialism. A constructive socialism. We need to develop a constructive socialism, right? A socialism that is about bringing people together, building people up, and offering people hope and stability and optimism. Not a socialism that's about tearing things down, because the socialism, the left-wing sentiment, the revolutionary intelligentsia's destructive impulses have been hijacked by imperialism. And the new Kamala Harris book is about this thesis as well. I talk about Kamala Harris as kind of an incarnation, if you look at her life, of Marxism being stripped of politics and being reduced to kind of the sentiments and the psychology of the revolutionary intelligentsia. So, this is a thesis. Trotskyism and what's wrong with Trotskyism, why Trotskyism is no good, is something I've studied extensively. And in my new book on Kamala Harris, in my book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, I talk about this. It's a very important point to understand, right? We need a constructive socialism. We don't need the socialism of tearing things down. We need a constructive socialism to get us out of the mess. Capitalism is creating chaos all over the world right now. Capitalism is destabilizing the world. It's making people poor. It's reducing countries to chaos and civil war and destruction. It's driving people into poverty. It's causing people to live even in this country, in much, much more unstable conditions. Socialism must be about bringing order, bringing stability. The Communist Party, the 1930s, their slogan was the way out. The way out. Socialism is the way out of the chaos. It's not a way to bring the chaos. It's a way out of the chaos. That is my thesis. And that's why I wrote City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. That's why I talk about socialism with American characteristics. That's why I talk about 21st century socialism. That's the situation we're in. So Trotsky, and understanding that Trotsky was very much an adherent of the revolutionary intelligentsia. All right? That's why it's worth bringing up. But no, the question was, do I think Trotsky was a Western spy? No, I don't. All right, next question. Okay, I did books on KPD-SPD relations. I mean, the Social Democratic Party of Germany was the party of industrial workers. I mean, I've talked about this. I talked about this in my other chat. We talked about KPD, SPD stuff before. Okay, so somebody asked, am I considering appointing myself president of the USA like Juan Guaido? No, I am not, for a couple reasons. First of all, if I were to do that just on my own, that would be a joke, right? And if I were to do that and somehow, which would never happen, but if somehow I were to do that and then had other countries bestowing recognition, bestowing recognition upon me, right? If I had, countries around the world then agreeing with me, at that point I would go to prison, or I might be shot and killed, right? And that's the thing, right? Juan Guaido is engaging in treason, right? He's declaring, the government of the country to be illegitimate. He's got foreign powers that are basically at war with Venezuela, bestowing upon him leadership. Most countries in the world, if you did that, you'd be locked up or worse. But, Juan Guaido gets to walk around doing all kinds of stuff. He hasn't been arrested. He goes back and forth. He's in Washington. He's in Venezuela. Juan Guaido is walking around doing stuff that would be, that would get you locked up in any other country in the world. Trust me. If this would never happen, okay? But if, hypothetically speaking, I were to declare myself president of the United States and then have North Korea and Iran recognize me, I would go to prison so fast, I would be in Guantanamo being waterboarded within 2 minutes. Okay? Now, if I were to do that just on my own, if I were to just be on here, I'm the president, yes I am, people would just laugh at me. But if there was actually foreign forces recognizing me, I would go to prison. I mean, I would be tortured. I might be killed. I mean, come on. So the person asking that question, it's a provocative way of asking the question, right? Now, I have no political aspirations at this time. I'm not running for office. So what will become of socialism should China fall? Jesus, what kind of question is that? Should China fall? Alrighty. All right. But let me add that, I have no political aspiration. So, maybe at some point in the future I might run for office, but I have no political aspiration. So, it's kind of a silly question, but it's worth bringing up. It's worth bringing up. It's cute, right? But yeah, I don't recommend people do that. I think that what we should be doing as socialists is engaging in the existing political system, right? I think socialists should run for office. I think that a real socialist platform that's not about destruction should be developed. And that's why I'm developing a think tank, the Center for Political Innovation. And let me announce that on October 17th, the Center for Political Innovation will be having a public Zoom conference that'll be streamed on this channel and elsewhere. More information is on its way. October 17th, mark your calendars. That's a upcoming Saturday in a couple weeks. We're going to have a Zoom conference for the Center for Political Innovation, so stay tuned. I was asked about Paul Cockshott. Yes, I have his book, The New Socialism, and I'm familiar with his work. Don't agree with all of it necessarily, but I'm familiar with Paul Cockshott. Great guy. Now, someone asked me about Christian extremism in Southeast Asia. I'm not familiar with Christian extremism in Southeast Asia in particular. I'm not familiar with it. I do know that in the Philippines, there is a lot of Roman Catholicism in the Philippines, but there's also a lot of evangelical stuff in the Philippines. And that's a factor, right? I do know that there's also a lot of Islam in Malaysia and places like that. I know Vietnam, Vietnam is frequently accused of violating the rights of the Catholic Church. Many people have pointed out the Human Rights Watch is just wrong in some of the stuff they're putting out there, but that's a frequent allegation made against Vietnam. I know in Indonesia, the ethnically Chinese population, some of them are Christians, and they are not treated well by the Muslims in Indonesia very well. So, I know that certainly exists. John Foster Dulles, who was the CIA's founder, John Foster Dulles, I quote him. He very famously said, I'll read you the quote. It's in the book here. I'll just read you exactly what he said, which kind of points to the role of religion in Asia and such. I'm just going to read you a direct quote from the founder of the CIA. This is what he said. John Foster Dulles wrote, quote, "The religions of the East are deeply rooted and have many precious values. Their spiritual beliefs cannot be reconciled with communist atheism and materialism. That creates a common bond between us, and our task is to find it and develop it." And that was in the 1950s. John Foster Dulles said that. And if you look at the way, the CIA has operated in Asia, fanatical religious groups have been a big part of what they do. For example, what is the main anti-China group in the United States right now? The main anti-China group. What is it? It's the Falun Gong. The Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa, also known as the Epoch Times. And they are a group of very, very nutty anti-China extremists. And there's a lot of Chinese people who don't like China and don't like the Chinese government that hate the Falun Gong. They consider them a dangerous cult. It's a religious cult. They believe you have a magical wheel in your stomach. If you do the right exercises, you can stimulate the magical wheel and go to heaven when you die. They believe that homosexuality is something that should be, completely outlawed and such. They actually had a debate in the group. Some believe in public executions for homosexuals. Others just believe in public castrations for homosexuals. So, big debate. Do we kill all the gay people, or do we just cut off the testicles of gay men? Important debate that they had in their group. Which one is necessary? They also believe that one of the biggest crimes of the Chinese Communist Party is that it lets women vote. Oh my God, it lets women vote. Oh, it lets women take elected office. Oh my God, right? They believe that the world is now in a Dharma ending period, and we're all getting away from traditional Buddhism and traditional feudal values. And that China needs to go back to the way it was when peasants knew their place and landlords were in charge and everyone obeyed and, bowed before magical statues and did magical exercises to get the magical wheel in their stomach. It's a very dangerous cult. The leader of it lives in Queens and has a house that costs about $500,000 and 2 houses, I believe. It's a dangerous cult. The Falun Gong is a dangerous religious cult. I knew somebody here in New York City who had a coworker, and his daughter joined the Falun Gong. He was Chinese. His daughter joined the Falun Gong. She was a Chinese American, spoke Chinese in her household, was born here. First thing the Falun Gong did is send her back to China, put her into situations where she would get arrested. And this guy ended up mortgaging his house to get his daughter out of prison in China, right? And that Falun Gong, family is very important, in China. Traditional family values, filial piety and such. They break apart families. You're not allowed to speak to your family unless you're trying to recruit them. They put children into very dangerous situations where they might get arrested in the mainland or might get hurt. Falun Gong, though, is the main anti-China group, right? They're the main anti-China group. Epoch Times, they're lobbying like crazy, and they're anti-China fanatics, and they used to pander to liberals mainly, right? It used to be that, that liberals were who they pandered to. They really liked Obama and all of that. But now that Trump has just really doubled down to become an anti-China fanatic, now it seems like they have thrown down behind Trump, and they're in this this anti-communist frenzy. So now they're big Trump supporters, and they go to Trump rallies and hand out their literature, which most groups are not allowed to do. It's Falun Gong. Who else do we have in Asia working against, socialism and communism? Well, we have the Moonies. I mentioned him earlier, Reverend Sun Myung Moon, right? The Moonies, they're called. And, it's this pastor from South Korea who says Jesus' mission on earth was not completed because he never got married. And so he is Jesus' second coming, and he got married, and his wife, they call him True Father. His wife is called True Mother, and he will pick your spouse for you. That way you don't get married based on who you're in love with, but you get married based on who God wants you to marry. And after he picks your spouse for you, he then he makes you and your spouse have sex in front of his photo. You got to have a big picture of him hanging on the wall while you're having sex. He says what positions you can have sex in. Yeah, it's pretty wacky. Islamic, whoa, Saudis and, whoa. Repeat that. I'm sorry. Can you please? Chapo's praised Xi for fighting billionaires and corruption. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear that about Chapo Trap House. I'm really glad that they're making. But can someone repeat the thing about it makes sense regarding the politics of today in the Saudis? I don't know what Islamic eschatology is, so I can't really explain it. I'm sorry. I really don't know enough about it. But who else? Now, back to what we were talking about. What about? I really just don't know what that is. But who else has been working with the CIA in Asia? You got the Tibet separatists, right? The Dalai Lama, right? That's the folks who want to break Tibet away from China, right? In the 1950s, there was the Tibetan Civil War, where the U.S. government airdropped a whole bunch of Tibetans, from Colorado. They were trained at military bases in Colorado. They airdropped them into Tibet to wage civil war, to burn healthcare clinics, to murder literacy volunteers, to engage in civil war. Hundreds of thousands of people died in Tibet. It was an ugly civil war. The Dalai Lama's brother was the leader of it. We always learn that the Dalai Lama was a man of peace, that Tibetan Buddhism is just so peaceful. Well, it wasn't so peaceful during the 1950s, during the Tibetan Civil War. And it was actually other Tibetans that carried out the revolution, that conducted the land reform. We always hear about, in Tibet during the Cultural Revolution, there were Tibetan monasteries that were destroyed. That's true. That's wrong. But who destroyed them? Other Tibetans did, right? It was during the Cultural Revolution. The Tibetan peasantry that had been oppressed by Buddhism for so long, and the monks, lived in splendor while the population was starving and hungry. They took their revenge, and it was awful, and it shouldn't have been done, right? I'm for religious freedom. But you'll have to remember, all throughout China, religious sites were being destroyed, not just in Tibet. Mosques were destroyed in Muslim regions, churches were destroyed in the mainland, temples were destroyed. And during the Cultural Revolution in China, there was a huge anti-religious campaign that was wrong, and it turned into an anti-Confucius campaign. Let's not forget, in 1970, they launched the Criticize Lin Biao, Criticize Confucius campaign, and that was wrong. So it wasn't like the Tibetan Buddhists were being singled out. There was an anti-religious fervor all throughout China as part of the Cultural Revolution. In the 1980s, the Chinese Communist Party apologized for that and changed their position. And now, actually, the Chinese Communist Party is funding Tibetan Buddhism. If you are a Tibetan Buddhist in Tibet, they will give you money to set up your own monastery, to set up your own temple. They will fund it. They will build a big road, a big highway to bus in tourists to come there. Tibetan Buddhist tourism is probably the main source of revenue in Tibet. Tibet is an impoverished region, but now because of all the awareness of the Dalai Lama and all of that, thousands of people from around the world go to Tibet to see these monasteries. So the Chinese Communist Party, at this point, is probably the main funder of Tibetan Buddhist religious activity. So, the Tibet separatists don't buy that. Oh, no. Oh, no. Evil Chinese communists are oppressing this beautiful Tibetan religious way. Well, that fits John Foster Dulles in the statement I just read. Who else, right? We got Uyghurs, about that, the knife attacks, and that there are Uyghur separatists that have gone on knife attacks and engaged in terrorism. We know that's going on. There's a group called Eastern Lightning. Have folks heard about Eastern Lightning? You should know about Eastern Lightning. Right? Another great group, right? Eastern Lightning. Eastern Lightning is a Christian group, started in China, and it's led by a woman. Well, it's actually not led by her, but they believe that there is a woman, who is Jesus' second coming. Jesus came again as a woman. Interestingly, though, the woman, Jesus, doesn't actually get to be in charge of the church, right? No. There's a man who's like her spokesperson. He's actually head of the Eastern Lightning Church. But, there's this woman who just kind of stands there. She's Jesus, everybody. It's like classic, like, talk about patriarchy, right? But religion makes people, even when women are the second coming of Jesus, they still don't get to lead religious groups. So Yeah, and they, of course, they go through China, proselytizing and doing crazy stuff. And I guess there was an incident at a McDonald's where some of these people, they were at a McDonald's in China. Some of the people from Eastern Lightning were handing out leaflets. There was a father who was a strong communist, and they went to hand their leaflet to his daughter, and he would not allow his daughter to take a leaflet from the Eastern Lightning people. And when they tried to hand her a leaflet, the Eastern Lightning people were so offended by this that they killed the father. They killed the father because he would not allow his daughter to take a leaflet from them. They killed them, right? I'm sorry. I've been out leafleting many times in my life. Many people have refused to take leaflets from me. I've had people, take the leaflet and rip it up in my face to be nasty. I've dealt with it all. Never have I ever killed anyone because they wouldn't take a leaflet from me. But there you go. So the Eastern Lightning people were so mad at this father because he wouldn't let the daughter take the leaflet, they killed him in the McDonald's. So the Chinese Communist Party said, this is a little bit of a dangerous group now, isn't it? So Eastern Lightning, the woman Jesus, now lives here in New York City. I don't know where she lives, but she lives here in New York City. And Eastern Lightning, the bizarre religious group with a woman who claims she's the second coming, and even though she's the second coming, she doesn't get to be the head of the church. This other guy is the head of the church. Are you noticing a pattern here, right? This is kind of how the U.S. government goes about fighting the Chinese Communist parties. It sets up cults, sets up weird, wacky religious cults to fight the Chinese Communist Party. Falun Gong, Tibet separatism, Uyghur separatism, Eastern Lightning, the Moonies, that they're fighting the Koreans, but they're also fighting the Chinese Communist Party. It fits a pattern, right? And that I think when it really gets down to it is that, Asian societies, there's a lot of collectivism, and religion and having something to devote your life to is very, very important to people from an Asian, culture. And that the CIA, has tried to harness that by building fanatical counter gangs to fight against communism in Asia. And this follows, the patterns. I just read you that John Foster Dulles quote. That's what's going on there. So I hope that was a long way of answering that question. All right. Someone said, Iran, question mark. Where did you run to? I'm just kidding. They said Iran, the country, question mark. I've been to Iran many times. A beautiful country, a revolutionary country, an anti-imperialist country. It's a country that in 1979 toppled a brutal U.S.-backed dictator, the Shah, and they broke the chains of Western imperialism, and they built a society based on principles of not capitalism but Islam, is what they preach. Not capitalism but Islam, war of poverty against wealth, neither East nor West. It's an Islamic system. The state controls banking, modern monetary theory. State controls banking, state controls major industries. The biggest economic entity in Iran is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And they're fighting for their lives against the imperialists. The imperialists would like to do everything they can to bring down and overturn the Islamic Revolution. Iran is a center of resistance to Israel. It's a center of resistance to Western capitalism. There are people all across the Middle East who look to Iran for inspiration, that if one country can be free, another country can be free as well. Iran has problems. There are issues with human rights there. I don't defend human rights violations. I don't believe someone was asking about a death penalty case in Iran. I oppose the death penalty. I don't think Iran should be using the death penalty. I oppose the death penalty. There are other issues in terms of women and such that is wrong. However, Iran, it's not what you think it is, right? Everything that I learned a long time ago when I went to Iran, been there 4 times now. That's a strange question. Is China a free country? Okay. Every time I went to Iran, after going to Iran, I learned that everything that Americans think is true about Iran is actually true about Saudi Arabia. In Iran, they have women in parliament. They have women drive cars all the time, women vote, women are brigadier generals in the army. In Saudi Arabia, which is a U.S.-aligned country, women just got the right to vote. Meanwhile, all the women who were protesting for the right to vote are now in prison for sedition. in Saudi Arabia, which is a U.S. aligned country, they cut people's heads off in public. In Saudi Arabia, which is a U.S. aligned country, it's an absolute monarchy. Iran has different political parties. Iran has elections. Iran has a huge level of economic development. Um, but Iran has problems. I mean, I'm not going to deny that. But, Iran is a revolutionary country. It's an anti imperialist country. It's not a capitalist country, in my view. It has broken out of Western capitalism. It has built a society. They have these things called basij in every neighborhood that carry out the goals of the revolution on a local level. And, the hatred for Iran, the desire to escalate tensions with Iran is problematic. I hope that the United States and Iran can be friendly. I would like to see the United States and Iran get along better. Um, that's what I would like to see. I don't want to see our two countries fighting with each other. But that's what the weapons manufacturers want to see. That's what Israel wants to see. That's what Betsy DeVos wants. That's what Sheldon Adelson wants, and so that's what we're getting. I was hopeful that the Iran deal might lead to better relations, but that was not the case. So yeah, there you go. Alrighty, taxes, money, spending. I think the tax burden on working people should decrease. And I think that we should stop spending huge amounts of money on our military budget and instead, build things like houses, schools, hospitals, etc. And I don't like the fact that big corporations often pay no taxes. And that I also don't like the idea that the right wing thinks that socialism and taxation are the same thing. Ben Shapiro, in a video, gives what he thinks is the most brilliant argument against socialism. Ben Shapiro says, socialism is wrong because it's not okay to beat me up and take my stuff. Well, I assume he's referring to government taxing people, right? Well, every country in the world has taxes, right? Every government in the world forcibly taxes people to some degree or other. So if you're saying it's wrong for the government to take your stuff, you're not against socialism. You're against every government on earth. Socialism is a system where the banks, factories, and industries are organized to serve public good and not profits. Socialism is not taxation. And that's what libertarians believe. They believe socialism is taxation, so every country in the world is social. This is silliness. This is just absolute silliness. Every country in the world, the government has to, handle the post office, has to, do you think the disorganized left of this country will be on one page anytime soon? Okay. Turning the page, writing it down. Disorganized left on same page. All right. So yeah, I gave you my position on taxes. Alrighty. David Harvey, City of Struggle. Well, David Harvey is a Marxist academic in New York City. He did a lot of stuff on capital. I think his book City of Struggle was about like real estate speculation and stuff. I've never really found David Harvey's stuff to be particularly inspiring. I met him a couple times and he was not particularly, I don't think he's my biggest fan. And, I don't know. But it's good that he's promoting Marxism and he's a professor. And I've listened to a number of his lectures and it's interesting. He talks about capital and he talks about Marx and he talks about Marxist economics. That's a good thing. I'm not opposed to what he does, but not my favorite, but whatever, whatever. Alrighty. A young person joining the military. Well, if you personally asked me my view, I would think you probably shouldn't do that. I know a number of people who've been in the U.S. military and have had very bad experiences. Very, very bad experiences. There was a camera guy I worked with who'd been in the U.S. military, and he had some pretty bad experiences. Boot camp is not a fun place to be. But after boot camp, a lot of people in the military, like this guy that I knew, he'd been in the U.S. Army, his, time had been, he was finished, right? He was going to be allowed to finish. And so they told him, you're not allowed to not re-enlist. And he said, why not? I said, I have the right to not re-enlist. And I said, no, we want you to stay in the military. He said, well, I'm going to re-enlist. They said, well, if you don't re-enlist, we're going to deprive you of an honorable discharge. This happens. And so, because he wouldn't re-enlist, they decided he had a psychological illness and kicked him out of the Army for having a personality disorder. This kind of thing happens all the time. It's like your punishment. Oh, you're not going to re-enlist? Okay, well then we're going to not give you an honorable discharge. And if you don't have an honorable discharge from the military, that looks very, very bad. People think you got kicked out of the Army for doing something bad, and that happens a lot, right? You know, in the military, I'm talking about non-war situations, okay? But let's talk. I'll never forget. Here's a story. I was going to tell this story a while back. I never got around to it. One night I was in college, right? First freshman year of college. Saturday night, I'm in my dorm reading a book or something. Knock, knock, knock on my door. I open the door. There's a guy standing in my college dorm, right? Standing there. He says, "Do you have any drugs?" And I said, "No, I don't have any drugs." And he said, "Well, I need to get some drugs. Do you know someone who can give me some drugs?" And I said, "Well, no, I don't know anyone who can give you some drugs." I said, "But come in, have a seat." And he said, "Oh," he said, "I got to do some drugs, man. I just got out of the Army." The guy sat in my dorm room in college, and we talked. We had a good chat for like an hour. This guy had just gotten out of the U.S. military. He had been in Iraq. He was finally out of the Army, finally gotten back to Cleveland, and he was desperate to use some drugs. And we talked, and being in Iraq was not fun. And we sat there and we talked in my college dorm for about an hour. Conversation I will not forget. Yeah. You know, the guy had been in Iraq. He'd seen some stuff. He told me about how scary it was to drive a truck down the street when you didn't know if there was going to be an IED bomb going off. And this guy was messed up, and he was desperate to get some drugs. There's another friend of mine in Cleveland who actually, he had a truck driving school. And, he taught people how to be truck drivers, right? That was his job. It was a place that trained truck drivers. And a number of guys who'd driven trucks for the U.S. military, driven trucks in Iraq, driven trucks in Afghanistan, worked there. And after that Paris shooting, after the shooting in Paris, the Charlie Hebdo thing, after that happened, one of the truck drivers wouldn't come out of his house. Had PTSD. He was so terrified. He said that they didn't get me over there. They're going to get me over here. Wouldn't leave his home, right? Because he was scarred by PTSD. Because he'd been driving a truck through Afghanistan or Iraq in fear of being blown up by terrorist groups. Then he heard about the Charlie Hebdo thing. Wouldn't leave his house, right? Was mentally ill to the point he wouldn't leave his house. In my hometown, my little town in Ohio, there was a guy who had come back from Iraq, and he committed suicide, by laying himself on railroad tracks. Pretty disgusting stuff. Trigger warning, by the way. If anyone's ever thinking about suicide, immediately contact a mental health professional. But it was, he killed himself that way. And when he came back from Iraq, everybody knew he wasn't well. And whatever happened, he committed suicide in a pretty grotesque way. It was pretty, the whole town heard about. Very sad. So, that all makes me think that joining the military is not a great idea. People make sacrifices. Let me emphasize, though, right? Do I not think that people who fought in the Russian Revolution or in the Chinese Revolution, or, do they not have PTSD like this? They certainly do. Certainly do. But at the end of the day, would you want to have, to be that badly damaged just so military corporations can make a buck? Would you want to be that badly damaged just so Raytheon can scrape in a few extra dollars so that General Electric can make more money? Would you want to be that badly scarred and damaged just so that, Gaddafi in Libya can't be giving people free health care and education anymore? just so that Saddam Hussein can't be using the oil profits to develop the Iraqi economy. I mean, war is horrible. War is a horrendous thing, okay? But, you know, I mean, I think that my grandfathers, both of them fighting the Nazis, was a good thing, right? They subjected themselves to some pretty horrible conditions, but it was to free the world from fascism, right? I mean, that's a different kind of thing, right? I know that people around the world have made great sacrifices to defend their homes, to defend their families, and I'm not saying that one should never engage in situations where one puts one at risk of being this badly damaged. But I'm saying, do you really want to risk being this badly damaged, this badly hurt, simply so that Wall Street and London can maintain their monopoly over the world? Right? I mean, if you're going, I think people should take great risks. I think people should make great sacrifices. I think people should engage in, risky behaviors sometimes. People should do things that are heroic, but they should do them for a good purpose. If you're going to put your life on the line, put it on the line for working families. Put it on the line for the oppressed. Put it on the line for justice. If you want to go out and risk your life, if you're going to do it for something good, right? I mean, would you want to get your arm or leg blown off so that Wall Street in London can get richer? Right? I mean, think about it. Even Donald Trump is the president of the United States. He's the president of the United States now. Even he says that the war in Iraq was based on a lie. All right? Everybody knew. He turned to Jeb Bush, said, everybody knows your brother lied to get us into a war. So even the Republican president now admits that the war in Iraq was a big waste of time, it was all based on a lie. Now, how do you think people who lost an arm or lost a leg and all that are feeling right now? All right, so even the Republican president admits that it was all a big lie. Someone says John Brown was that kind of hero. Yes, and I'm not opposed to people taking risks. I'm not opposed to people taking sacrifices, making sacrifices, that I'm not opposed to. But I'm telling you that if you want to be a hero, don't you want to be a hero for a good cause? I don't think Wall Street and London ruling the world and bombing and destroying another country and helping terrorists set up shop in a new country by overthrowing another secular socialist government is a good idea, right? I mean, I don't think that's a good cause. I don't think that's a cause that you want to put your life on the line for. That's my opinion, right? Now, you can have your opinion, and was John McCain a hero? Okay, writing it down. Okay, there you go. Okay, I hope that answered your question. But yeah, like I said, if anyone ever has any thoughts of being suicidal or whatever, they should see a mental health professional immediately. If you want to join the military, that's your decision. I'm actually proofreading a book for a friend of mine right now. Older guy who's a friend of mine. He didn't want to. Who was John Brown? All right. He didn't want to fight in the Vietnam War. Didn't want to fight in the Vietnam War. So he went to Canada. And I bet you didn't know that in Canada there were whole networks of people in Canada to help you if you were an American draft resistor, if you didn't want to fight in Vietnam. It's kind of fascinating. There was a whole network of people in Canada. It's fascinating. I'm reading his memoir of setting up this draft resistance group. For people who didn't want to fight in Vietnam. It's very fascinating. A lot of Canadian communists worked very, very hard to make sure that Americans who didn't want to fight in the Vietnam War had a place to go and weren't homeless on the streets in Canada and stuff like that. It's very fascinating history. This book that a friend of mine has written is going to be pretty good when it comes out. I didn't know half this stuff, right? I mean, there's so much history I was not aware of. So there you go. All right. Is going to college worth it? Yeah, it can be. I don't think it was for me. But it can be. If I could go to college again, I would study something else. I would study something useful, like graphic design or, filmography or video editing, or, economics, maybe. But even economics, I went to college, I studied political science, and I didn't really get much out of it. I learned a lot in college, just not in the classroom. I learned at the library. I did a huge amount of reading and study when I was in college. I learned a lot. I jokingly tell people I didn't do very well in college because I was too busy studying. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I mean, going to college can be worth it. But I guess the main thing is, don't go to college because you want to learn. Go to college because the degree you will get will help you get a job that you want. Find the job you want, find the degree you need for that job, go to college, get that degree so you can get that job. The mistake that I made was that my whole family had been telling me, oh, you're going to love college, Caleb. You're going to love college. Everyone's nerdy and bookish like you in college. And, oh, don't worry, you hate high school. You're going to love college so much. I went to college and I hated it. It was awful. Because people there don't want to learn. People there don't care, right? I mean, and I was the annoying guy in classes who was raising his hand and arguing with the professor and stuff. And, college is, especially nowadays, it used to be that college was a little bit more of a learning-oriented environment because only certain people went. But you talk about education inflation. That's a big trend, right? Where, nowadays, everybody in the United States goes to college. Right? Everybody does, right? I mean, and the factories aren't there anymore, and everybody goes to college, right? Barack Obama said that his goal is for all Americans to go to college. So everybody goes to college, so college is a lot more like high school, right? Everybody goes to high school. It's required by law. Well, it's not required by law. ETA on faux left book. Okay. All right. ETA faux left book. It's not required that you go to college, but it's like everybody goes to college. So a lot of people in college don't give a flying hoot. They don't want to learn. They don't want to be there. Plus, I don't know. I mean, it's just, college has become, but was it better before? I don't know. I mean, I didn't get much out of the college that I went to, but there are a lot of people who do. I mean, I don't know. I mean, is going to college worth it? Yes. I mean, if I could make my choice again, I would go to college I would pick a job I wanted, and I would get a degree that would help me get that job. That's what I would do. And I did not do that. Instead, I went to college and studied political science because I'm very interested in politics. Well, I wasn't happy. If I had decided I wanted to be a graphic designer, and I'd gone and I'd studied graphic design, and then gotten a job as a graphic designer, that would be great. I probably shouldn't have done that, though, because I'm not very good at graphic design. I can't do it. Every time I try to design graphics myself, it looks awful. I have to have somebody else do it because I'm just not good at that kind of thing. But, I feel like people should use college as a way to get a job they want. That's what people should use it for. Most people in this world don't want to learn. Most people in the world are not interested in any of the stuff we're talking about on here. Let's be real, okay? I hate to be a jerk. Most people in the world don't give a flying F about everything we're talking about on here. College is a place where, in theory, you're supposed to talk about this stuff. But just because you're required to talk about this kind of thing does not mean people give a flying F about it. And I spent 4 years in a lot of college classrooms where no one gave a flying F about any of this stuff. My professors kind of liked me. The other students found me obnoxious. I had a little circle of friends in college, which was kind of neat. And in college, I got out of my shell. I did all kinds of activism when I was in college. So, I mean, it wasn't a complete waste of time. But why am I rambling about this? I've given this answer way more. Okay, that answered the question. All right. Can one be pro-Syria, pro-Belarus, and anti-modern Russia? Well, you can take whatever position you want to take, right? Syria has benefited greatly from its alliance with Russia. Belarus has benefited greatly from its alliance with Russia, and I think the leader of Belarus is regretting some of his recent, disrespect to Russia, honestly, because at this point, he was cozying up to the USA, and look, now they're trying to overthrow him. I'm sorry, I'm a new viewer. I like a lot of your stuff. Write a paper. Does that mean you will talk on it later in another video? Thank you. I write the super chats down and I read them off. That's what I do. That's how this works. If you super chat me, I'll write your thing down and I'll get to it eventually, right? I answer every super chat. That's how this works. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I don't know why. We should be critical of every country. You say you support Belarus, you support Syria, but not modern Russia. Well, why not be critical of Belarus? There's plenty of problems in modern Belarus. There's plenty of problems in modern Syria, right? And there's plenty of problems in modern Russia. Countries are not perfect. There is no perfect country. There is no perfect system, okay? All three of those countries have problems. All three of those countries are worth criticizing. But all three of those countries are standing up to Western capitalism and imperialism. And they all have their strengths and they all have their weaknesses. There is no perfect solution. There is no heaven on earth. That's just the reality. So, yeah. Alrighty. What will happen to socialism should China fall? Person who asked that question, I want to clue you in on something. All right. China has been about to fall my entire life. I remember when I was a kid, they were saying, oh, China, it's all going to fall apart pretty soon. Oh, they've had all this growth, but it's going to fall apart. Oh, they're going to fall. Heard that in the 90s. In the 2000s, I heard this. Oh, China's going to fall. China's going to fall. Any day now, China's going to go and fall. I remember in 2015, the Chinese stock market crashed a couple times. And everyone said, see, we've been telling you for so long, China is going to fall. China's finally going to fall. Oops, China did not fall. If China fell, in theory, right? That would obviously have a huge impact. The fall of the Soviet Union had a huge impact on global socialism. So in the hypothetical situation you are describing, it's possible that that would have a pretty intense impact. That said, there you go. Should China fall? Now, modern monetary theory, if I'm understanding correctly, modern monetary theory is the idea that the government should print money and give it to people, right? That instead of taxing people, the government, when it prints money, should just put the money it prints into the public budget. Interesting idea. I think that's what MMT is, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know that much about it, but it's interesting. Clearly the way our Federal Reserve System works is a joke. Every dollar we print, we get more than a dollar in debt, right? We get in debt by printing money. The Federal Reserve, libertarians should love the Federal Reserve. Libertarians should love the Federal Reserve. Why? The Constitution of the United States mandates that the government of the United States print the money. But we've privatized it, right? They want to privatize our schools. They want to privatize our health care. They want to privatize everything. We've privatized the printing of money. We got the government out of it. We got this private company to do it. Great. So I don't like the Federal Reserve System. Another war. Writing it down. So, yeah. Is China a free country? What's a free country? What is a free country? At this point in the United States, we have the highest prison population of any country in the world by numbers and percentages. So are we free? If more of our people are in prison than any other country in the world? Does China have the same level of freedom of speech and freedom of religion and freedom of assembly that we have in the United States? No. And that's, China would like to move ahead with human rights. They'd like to get to a position where they can do that. They need reform in terms of human rights. But so do we. We need reform in terms of human rights, right? There are issues of human rights that we are pretty bad at, in case you haven't noticed. Is any country free? Freedom, right, means, no restriction upon, your activities. Well, every society in all of history has had restrictions upon, the activities of the individual. Human civilization itself is about imposing restrictions on your freedom. I am not free to run around naked on the streets of New York City. If I did that, I would be arrested for indecent exposure. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that people aren't allowed to run around naked. But if I'm going to be protected from having people running around naked, I myself have to give up my freedom to run around naked, right? If there's going to be a law that you can't run around naked on the streets of the city, it can't not apply to me. It has to apply to everybody, right? This is how civilization works. You ought to read Sigmund Freud's book, Civilization and Its Discontents. I don't like Sigmund Freud. In particular, I disagree with a lot of the conclusions of that book, but it's a pretty observational thing about how basically human beings have impulses towards aggression and sexuality, etc., and that human society restrains those aggressions, and that there's constantly in human history a struggle to renegotiate those restraints, right? And in feudalism, those restraints were very, very tightly restricted. You know, modern times, those restraints are not as tightly restricted. And that renegotiating the restraints on human impulses, allowing a higher level of freedom, or renegotiating the level of freedom, has been the struggle of human history. Right? We're constantly trying to figure out what is the level of freedom that a society should have. Now, obviously, when societies are more stable, when there is less of a threat to the social order, when there is not a war going on, when there's a level of economic development, the level of freedom increases. However, in any society, when there is less economic prosperity, when there is less stability, there is less freedom, right? Right? Nobody, culture war in America, nobody anywhere in the world talked about human rights and the rights of man anywhere until like the 1400s in Europe. Why? Was it because human beings were just evil until the Enlightenment? Human beings were just evil until the Enlightenment, and one day we just woke up and said, hey, people ought to have freedom of speech and freedom of assembly? No. It was that no society in history had reached the level of economic development and the level of stability to facilitate that lifting of impulses. Imagine the Dark Ages in Europe, right? The year 1000. In the year 1000 in France and Gaul, in the year 1000, you try to set up a society where everyone can think whatever they want and do whatever they want, and instead of having a noble who runs everything and is the owner, ordained by God to rule over everyone, they vote for the person. In the year 1000 in medieval Europe, you try that and see how long that would last. The feudal order was based on the fact that the level of economic development and the level of stability in society at that time necessitated that level of authoritarianism. And as society advanced, and as technology advanced, and as the level of freedom advanced, the level of freedom also advanced, right? And that freedom in any society is based on a level of economic development and a level of stability. If a country is at war, I was told by an anarchist that China has little or no free healthcare. I'm skeptical. Okay, China healthcare. Right? The level of freedom in any society is based on a level of economic development. When a society is fighting for its life in a war, very little freedom is available. When people don't have enough food to eat, very little freedom is available. When people have food to eat, when there's not a dangerous war going on, the level of freedom expands. That's just how these things work. We talk about freedom. The way we talk about freedom in the United States, we talk about like the level of freedom that we have in the United States is the level of freedom that all countries should have at all times, no matter what. That's not realistic. It's simply not realistic, right? I would like a maximum amount of freedom. In fact, I would like us to get to the point where no coercion was necessary, right? I think that we need a world with so much material abundance and so much prosperity and peace that a government itself can fade away. But in order to get to that point, we have to have economic development. So talking about human rights as if they exist in a vacuum, right? As if societies just pick a level of freedom. The USA, we're like, we want this level of freedom. China's like, we want this level of freedom. And we say, no, China, you got to have the same level of freedom. It's not how it works. Freedom is based on the level of stability, the level of economic development. You can't talk about these things in a vacuum. Okay? And I hope that you're learning something from what I said. Okay. Will the disorganized left of the United States ever get on the same page? No, it won't. Most of the left that exists currently is kind of functioning as counter gangs for the Eastern establishment. The Eastern establishment in Silicon Valley are fighting a struggle against the Trump wing of the ruling class. There are two factions in the ruling class. I've talked about this on many different lives. Silicon Valley and Wall Street, big oil monopolies are on one side, and weapons manufacturers and Sheldon Adelson and Hobby Lobby and, a lot of Trump people, Home Depot, others are on another side. There's a fight in the ruling class. The fracking companies are on one side with Trump, and right, and that most of the left has degenerated at this point into just a counter gang for the Eastern establishment. They are foot soldiers of the Eastern establishment in the struggle to wrangle power away from another wing of the ruling class. And that's really all that there is. And that the Eastern establishment, the way that they assert their power internationally as well as domestically, is unleashing chaos. And that's, the fall of the Soviet Union, George Soros, color revolutions, unleashing chaos. At this point, forgive me if I sound right-wing here. I'm sure someone's going to clip this and say, oh, Caleb said it's... No, I mean, Trump is awful. I don't support Trump. His policies are awful. But the Eastern establishment wing, the ultra-rich that are fighting the lower levels of American capital in the struggle for power, they are mobilizing the left, or what calls itself the left, to push back against the lower levels of capital, the right wing, that are mobilizing their forces, the far right, And it's a power struggle within the ruling elite. And most of the left they're basically foot soldiers for the Eastern establishment. Now, that might be the right thing to do, but at the end of the day, the Eastern establishment doesn't want to build socialism. They just, that's all that's going on here. And the problem is the Eastern establishment, they have a pessimistic worldview. They think there are too many people in the world. They're Malthusian. They think that human development has gone too far, and they think that countries around the world shouldn't be raising themselves up out of poverty. And they are social engineers, and they want to effectively manipulate and control society, reduce the human population, and hold back technological development. They are pessimistic. That's their viewpoint. Okay. Meanwhile, the right wing are vicious free marketeers, racists. Read Mosler and Kelton's book on MMT, YouTube on it. Then you'll understand. Okay, I'll check it out. But there's a fight in the ruling class right now. And that's the situation. And most of the left are helping the Eastern establishment to unleash chaos because they want to get rid of Trump. Well, Trump is bad. I'm not a fan of Trump, but I'm not a fan of the Eastern establishment either. There's a fight in the ruling class. I am not sure which faction is better. What we need is constructive socialism. I've said this before. That's why I wrote this whole book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age. We need a new form of socialism that's not about unleashing chaos, that's about, bringing stability. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. That is the slogan I have painted up everywhere. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a socialism that goes to average Americans and says, we are going to fight to make your life better. We need left-wing populism. We need anti-imperialism. We need class struggle. We need actual socialism, not chaos for the Eastern establishment. And we certainly don't need the right wing and racism and bigotry and anti-immigrant hate and Islamophobia and everything that they're associated with. We need a new left. We need a left that is about building things, not tearing things down. Right? We need to break with the mindset of the revolutionary intelligentsia. That's what we need. In my new book on Kamala Harris, my other book, City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, that's the case that I make. Leftism must be reinvented. That's what I believe the future of the left is. There you go. That's what I believe. That's what must be done. That we need to construct, out of the chaos created by capitalism, we need to construct socialism. And we need socialism that is about, I've told people many times, I'm not a socialist because I want to destroy America. I'm a socialist because I want to save America. And only socialism will save America. And that's the reality, right? You want to talk about one of these groups, right? There's a group that used to call itself Freedom Road Socialist Organization, right? There's another group that still calls itself Freedom Road Socialist Organization. That's not who I'm talking about. There's this group that now calls itself Liberation Road. And Liberation Road, they claim to be Maoists, post-Maoist, something like that. Right? You look at their website. They have got this manifesto up there explaining their beliefs, right? And you want to talk about people that are just shills for the Eastern establishment. Read it. They wrote this whole complex manifesto to justify being foot soldiers for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. And you read it, and it's like you could add a laugh track. You know, this group Liberation Road, all they do, their members work at liberal NGOs or labor unions. That's all they do. And they go to a meeting every other week or whatever, so they can pretend they're still communists. But they're not. They're functionaries for Planned Parenthood or the ACLU or the AFSCME or whatever, right? And Students Against Sweatshops, Center for Constitutional Rights. They're functionaries in some kind of liberal NGO. And then they go and they have a secret meeting where they all hide their cell phones, and then they pretend that they're ultra revolutionaries and argue with each other about Pol Pot or something like that. But at the end of the day, they're just functionaries for the Democrats, right? They're pretending that they're doing something better, but they're just functionaries for the Democrats. So they wrote this manifesto on their website to justify what they're doing. And you read it, and the level of ignorance that these people have, you have to wonder if these people have ever read Marx in their entire life. Have they ever read, Stalin? Have they ever read Mao? I mean, these people are claiming to be Maoists. You read this garbage. So check this out. Donald Trump is the new Confederacy. Donald Trump represents the new Confederacy. And so the Democrats and Joe Biden are just like Lincoln, and we got to support them against Donald Trump. Well, there's a little bit of a contradiction there, because economically, right, Trump, they call him anti-globalist and all this. The Confederacy was not anti-globalist. The Confederacy was tied in. The only reason the Confederacy existed was because the British Empire needed the cheap cotton for their textile mills. Meanwhile, it was Abraham Lincoln and Henry Carey that were pushing all the protectionism. Wall Street and London were with the Confederates. Industrialists and protectionists were with Lincoln. Lincoln's economics were closer to Steve Bannon's. The Confederacy's economics were global free trade economics. So calling Donald Trump the new Confederacy is the stupidest, but economics doesn't matter to these people, right? All these people care about is who's a racist, who's a sexist, who's a homophobe. They don't care about economics. So economically, Trump's protectionist stuff is in line with Lincoln. Whereas the Eastern establishment, the free trade, the quote-unquote globalist faction, their politics are in line with the Confederacy. If you know anything about economics, right, that Lincoln was the champion of Northern industrialists, whereas Wall Street was the center of pro-Confederate sentiment in the North and the Democratic Party, whereas the British almost sent their military to support the Confederacy, and then Russia sent their military to the New York harbor to fight. But these people don't know any of that, right? I mean, you look at this. These people are supposed to be Maoists. There's all these academics tied in with them, in addition to people secretly maneuvering. They don't know any of this, right? What facts? Who cares, right? The Confederacy was racist, true. Donald Trump is racist, true. So therefore, Donald Trump is the new Confederacy. Idiots. But you read their manifesto. It's like MSNBC talking points. Donald Trump is racist. Donald Trump is sexist. Donald Trump is this. Donald Trump is that. Anti-immigrant and all this. So that justifies working with the Democrats. Hey, it's a new civil war. Well, it's like, no. Like, there was a huge labor movement that supported Abraham Lincoln, okay? There was Marxist organization. Like, this is not, you look at this. That's their level of analysis. Donald Trump, the faction that is less interested in military adventurism around the world, the faction that is constantly being witch hunted by Wall Street or by the media and accused of being tied in with, oh my gosh, Russia. Donald Trump is constantly being compared to quote unquote authoritarian leaders in the developing world. That's the new Confederacy. Meanwhile, the ruling class, the Joe Biden, right, the folks who want to globally control the world for capitalism. Malthusians and, hold back development in impoverished countries around the world. Those folks, right, that believe in the IMF and the World Bank, that want to maintain the NATO alliance, that are more concerned about the long-term survival of Western capitalist imperialism, those folks are Lincoln. Now, I have never, I mean, that level of stupidity. I mean, these people have never read Marx's writings on the American Civil War. Marx explains in detail the economics of Lincoln, the economics of the Confederacy. Marx goes into detail about it. All kinds of Marxist scholars have written about this, but these stupid people in this Liberation Road group, they want to justify the fact that they are foot soldiers for the Eastern establishment, right? They're foot soldiers for the twisted, demented, Malthusian, ruling class, the Silicon Valley fascists, that they're working for them, right? In the hopes of locking the door and getting into office and nailing the door shut to make sure Bernie Sanders can never happen again. You know, they're doing all of this and they're justifying it with this new. It's ignorant, right? It's just completely ignorant, right? And I'm sure, and this is classic, if I were to point out to them everything that I've just pointed out there, their response would be, well, we're real organizers. We actually do real organizing. You're just a talking guy on the internet. We actually do stuff. Oh, that's good that you actually do stuff. But has it ever occurred to you that maybe what you do might be a problem? Geez, the Nazi Party does stuff. My local bowling league does stuff. Maybe what you do is the issue, not whether you do stuff or not, number one. Number two, they would say, well, you're a fascist. Why am I a fascist? Well, you associate with people that CNN told me you're fascist. It's like, and your point is, Jesus, whatever, right? You just gotta, this is, but you want to read some pathetic justifications for being foot soldiers for some of the most evil people in the world. Read Liberation Road's little manifesto about the new Confederacy. It's embarrassing. These people have never read Marx on the Civil War. They have no idea about economics. They don't care about economics. They're too busy writing their PhD thesis on, the how Vladimir Putin is oppressing transgender people in Puerto Rico and why we need to set up an NGO funded by Soros to fight for those Puerto Rican people against the evil Russian imperialists. These people are just, leftism is a joke, okay? Leftism has become a big joke. There's a reason that the Democrats have no problem supporting all these protests and stuff right now. There's no danger of any of it leading to their overthrow. There's no danger of it. No danger. If we had a situation in the United States like we have right now, where people are protesting against police brutality all across the country, big divide in the ruling class, and there was a big communist party, this could be a potentially revolutionary situation. We could be on the brink of taking power. But we don't. Right now, the left is irrelevant. The left is, they just are, chaos is all it is. If they ever met a real communist, if they ever met William Z. Foster or Gus Hall or Huey Newton, they would call them fascists, right? For these people, all socialism is a crude Freudian manipulation. It's, I don't want any restraints on my impulses. I want to be able to have sex and do whatever I want, and I don't want any restraint on my impulses. That's all socialism means to these people. Leftism is about going out and breaking stuff in the streets and screaming and yelling and letting their emotions come out. That's all it is to these people. And, that's not what socialism is, right? Socialism is a constructive ideology. It's an optimistic ideology. It's not climate pessimism. It's not Malthusianism. And these people, it's an embarrassment, right? But, basically most leftist groups are just people that are working with the Eastern establishment to try and create chaos, and Donald Trump is not good. I'm not, for Trump, okay? I'm not, right? But at the end of the day, is working with, basically the fight in the ruling class right now is a fight between more effective evil, strategic evil, managerial evil, versus stupid short-term evil. Donald Trump represents short-term, selfish, not strategic evil. Joe Biden represents the Council on Foreign Relations and the Rockefellers and Silicon Valley and forces that are just as evil as Donald Trump, but have gotten really smart at their evil, right? And these people, if they ever met Mao, if they ever met Stalin, if they ever met Lenin, they would call them fascist, because Lenin and Stalin and Mao didn't talk all day about sex. Lenin and Stalin and Mao talked about economics, they talked about history, they talked about facts. They didn't just talk about sex all day long. So forgive me for getting a little angry there, but I saw that manifesto the other day and I thought, these people are pathetic. I mean, the new Confederacy, do they know any, but economics doesn't matter to them. Here's the thing, if economics doesn't matter to you, right? If it's all just about social liberalism versus social conservatism, yeah, you're right. It's the fight of your life right now. The fight of your life, right? Liberals right now have never told people to go out and break shit as much as they are. Conservatives have never been as, I mean, they have been more conservative, but conservatives are definitely, holding on to religion and authoritarian conservatism. So, if all being a leftist means to you is, I want permission to release my impulses, by all means, sign up, work for Rockefeller. But if you actually want to see a society where people are not hungry and starving on the street, if you actually want to see humanity overcome the prison of fossil fuels, if you actually want to see, the human race expand, if you actually want to see technology advance, if you actually want to see the human life expectancy expand, if you want to see, illiteracy wiped out in this world, if you want to see a world without homelessness, poverty, and war, and all that, I mean, being a foot soldier for the Eastern establishment ain't going to get it for you. We need a constructive socialism. We need the city-building tendency in human history. We need Julius Caesar. We need Alexander the Great. We need what enabled Stalin to launch his 5-year plans. I mean, what enabled China to become, at this point, the second largest economy in the world. We need collectivism. We need idealism and joint vision. Okay? Forgive me for getting a little ugly there. Anyway, next question. John McCain, was he heroic? Okay, let me just point out some things, okay? Obviously, John McCain suffered a great deal when he was in prison in Vietnam, when he was being held as a prisoner of war. What was John McCain doing before he was held prisoner in Vietnam? He was bombing Vietnam. He was bombing civilians. He was flying over Vietnam, bombing civilians. Millions of Vietnamese people died because Americans were flying over Vietnam and bombing it, bombing the country, killing it. They bombed the harbors. They bombed the dikes and flooded areas and killed people. It was, so John McCain, he was bombing Vietnam, killed lots of people. His plane crashed, and the local Vietnamese people were going to kill him. They were going to lynch him. Well, John McCain's father was an admiral, and Navy admiral, and it was a local Vietnamese communist party member who realized, a woman communist, who realized that he was somebody who was valuable and stopped the local villagers from just killing John McCain after his plane went down. So a Vietnamese communist saved John McCain's life. Right? If the local people, the local population of Vietnam, just the average people in the area that he was bombing, had gotten their way, they would have killed him the second they pulled him out of his airplane. But it was a Vietnamese communist woman who saved his life. However, John McCain, throughout his life, continued to refer to Vietnamese people by the racial slur GOOKS. I'm not going to repeat the slur. You know what I mean. Right? That's what he referred to them as. Now, he was held prisoner. There are some people that have criticized some of his accounts of what actually went on in the prison. If he was tortured, I don't believe in torture. Torture is wrong. I'm not gonna defend if John McCain's human rights were violated when he was a prisoner. I don't defend that. However, after John McCain, was sent back to the United States, his career, he was a big supporter of overthrowing the Syrian government, and he met with, extremists that eventually went on to form ISIS. He went into Syria, he illegally crossed the border into Syria, and met with the terrorists who eventually formed ISIS. He was fanatically devoted to, overthrowing the government of Belarus. He was a war hawk and an extremist. I don't hold John McCain in high admiration. I don't. I see John McCain as a hawk, as an extremist. I'm glad he was opposed to torture. It's a little bit weird that right before he died, he wrote this glowing article about a communist who fought against Franco in Spain. I think that's a little bit weird. And it's interesting that his wife has now endorsed Joe Biden. But at the end of the day, not a big John McCain fan. I see John McCain as the military-industrial complex. I'm sorry that he suffered in that prison as a prisoner of war in Vietnam. I'm also sorry that, about 4 million Vietnamese people died because people like John McCain were bombing Vietnam. But, if his human rights were violated as a prisoner of war, I'm not for that. No one should be, no one should be tortured. No one should be held in conditions that are not, good. I do think it's amusing that, when I was a kid, there'd be a parade that would happen. There'd be a parade that would happen for Veterans Day or whatever. And they'd always have that POW/MIA flag. I always just thought that meant, whatever. It was just people that were taken prisoners of war. It was like, you're honoring the dead. You also honor people that are, prisoners of war. Later, I found out that apparently after the Vietnam War, there was a belief among right-wingers for decades that somehow thousands of American GIs were still being held in Vietnamese prisons in Vietnam, and that the U.S. government was covering it up, and that this was like pre-QAnon. This was like a popular right-wing conspiracy theory. Even the Rambo movie, like First Blood, is all about this, right? That apparently a lot of right-wingers actually believe that I don't know if they still believed that there was all these American GIs that were still, that were still being held in Vietnam, and that like the government was covering it up, and our boys had been abandoned. Bring our boys back home, and it was just like it was clearly not the case. I mean, the Vietnamese had given back everybody pretty much, but it was like this right-wing belief that there was this vast conspiracy to cover up the fact that all these GIs, American GIs, were still being held in Vietnamese jails. It's pretty ridiculous. All right. Who was John Brown? Well, John Brown was an anti-slavery fighter, an abolitionist. He fought at Harper's Ferry, tried to seize Harper's Ferry to launch a revolt against slavery. He fought in Kansas during the Bleeding Kansas time, when it was Kansas, it was up in the air. Would Kansas be a slave state or a free state? He went out to Kansas and fought against the slaveholders. John Brown was an anti-slavery fighter. He was a hero. He was hanged by the U.S. government. He fought against slavery, and he was dedicated to fighting against slavery. He was motivated by his Christian beliefs to fight against slavery. He's one of the greatest heroes in American history. I'm a huge admirer of John Brown. So there you go. All righty. ETA on the Synthetic Left book after the elections. The Kamala Harris book is like the first little taste of it. It's like a preview, I guess, but it'll be after the elections. I have to get it all together, right? It's all there. It's written basically, but I have to get it exactly right, and I have a huge bibliography that I've written for it. It's mostly written, but after the elections, after November, the Synthetic Left book will come out. Is another war likely? Well, in terms of, yes, the U.S. imperialists are always looking for a new country to go after. They're always looking for a new target for their interventions. They're always looking for a new anti-imperialist state to destabilize or overturn. That's always happening. So, is a big world war possible? Well, as I always end my lives with a quotation from Chairman Mao, where he said, "The danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared." And yes, the danger of a new world war certainly exists in our time, right? I mean, the imperialists, Wall Street and London, they are determined to hold back the wave of economic development coming from Russia and China. They don't like seeing countries raise themselves up out of poverty. They don't like the new multipolarity that's existing in the world. They want to roll back, the wave of development from China's Belt and Road Initiative, from Russia's Eurasian Economic Union, from the Bolivarian alternative of Latin America. Could it develop to a third world war? I really hope not, because a third world war would have some pretty negative implications for the human race. Who's to say they won't, right? Who's to say they won't? All right. Is there a culture war in America? Well, it's interesting. The phrase, well, let me take a drink here. I'm going to finish off this orange juice. The term culture war, it's a very important term. If you're a Marxist, you should know the term culture war. So you'll know that where was the biggest Marxist party in the world? before World War One? Where was the biggest? Where did Marxism have the most influence? Germany. In Germany. And in Germany, in the 1800s, right, as Marxism was emerging, the Social Democratic Party of Germany became like the flagship Marxist party in the world, right? The party was started by Marx and Engels, right? The critique of the Goethe program by Karl Marx is about the founding of the German Social Democratic Party. Marx died, but, Engels and others, they set up this party, and Karl Kautsky eventually became the most outspoken leader of the German Social Democratic Party, and they were the flagship Marxist party in German in the world. They were the biggest Marxist party in the world, led by Karl Kautsky. And the German Kaiser did not like them, and there were laws against socialism, the anti-socialist laws, to try and outlaw them and suppress them. And there was all kinds of efforts to stop the march of German Marxism. German workers formed labor unions. German socialists got elected to parliament. There was a huge Marxist movement in Germany. So one of the methods that the German Kaiser developed to fight against Marxism was staging Kulturkampf, or culture wars, right? And that was, he would pass laws or push, proposals that would incite Catholic Germans against non-Catholic Germans, right? Germany, it's pretty evenly split down the middle at that time, right? It was half Catholic, half Protestant, right? And so in some areas, they would announce, we're going to make a law that they have to use the Catholic Bible in school. And of course, the Catholics would be for that, and the non-Catholics, the Protestants, would be against it. They would pass, other laws. And by inciting culture wars, it was a way to divide the German working class. German workers generally wanted their pay to increase. German workers generally wanted their wages to go up. They wanted their hours to be reduced. They wanted better economics, right? But staging a Kulturkampf, culture war, culture struggle, staging one of those was a way to incite workers against each other on the basis of their religious beliefs and break the solidarity of the workers. And it also divided different regions. Bavaria is traditionally Catholic. There are other parts of Germany that are mainly Protestant. And that's what happened. Are there culture wars in America? Absolutely. Absolutely they are. The values of people in New York City and the values of people in the Midwest and in the South are very different. West Coast, there are different value systems here in the United States. People view things differently. People, even like social tradition, like the way people talk to each other is different, right? If Roe versus Wade were to be overturned, a lot of states in the U.S. South, like Mississippi and Alabama, would immediately outlaw abortion. But New York State would never outlaw abortion, right? Those are different cultural values, right? It's just some parts of this country would immediately outlaw abortion, other states would not, right? If the gay marriage ruling were to be overturned, some states would immediately ban gay marriage. Other states, New York, California, gay marriage would remain, right? There are different cultural values, and the ruling class knows this. They don't. They absolutely do not want to have a debate about, should we have a government of action that fights for working families? Should we seize control of our oil? Should we rebuild this country with a mass mobilization? Should we, wipe out unemployment? Should we raise the living standards? Should we cut the Pentagon budget to feed the people of the United States? Should we have a scientific revolution and start funding, scientific research? And no, they don't want to have a debate about, should we actually change the country? They know that some Americans are just dead set against abortion. Other Americans are dead set, in favor of a woman's right to choose. I'm one of those. I think the woman should have the right to choose. Some Americans are dead set against gay marriage. Other Americans are dead set against gay marriage. And it's much easier to have that kind of political argument, and it's much safer for the ruling class. If, at the end of the day, the ruling class wants to have culture struggles, culture wars. It doesn't want to have class struggle. And so, is there a culture war in the United States? Yes, desperately. They're working their hardest they can to set up a culture war. And I want economic class struggle and populism. I want I'm not opposed. Women have the right to go out and fight for their right to choose. LGBT people certainly have the right to go out and fight for their right to get married and their right to not be harassed on the street. I would never tell anybody, who is, suffering for their LGBT background or suffering as a woman, that they shouldn't talk about their rights. Would never tell people of color not to resist racism. But I'm telling you that if the left is going to win, if socialism is going to be victorious, it's got to break out of the culture wars. It's got to become a struggle for working class power. It's got to demand a government of action to fight for working families. That's what's got to happen, right? If socialism is going to be victorious. If socialists remain as they are now, foot soldiers in the culture war, it's a trap. It's a disaster. So there you go. Okay, the last super chat was about the Chinese healthcare system. The New York Times and other publications have done a lot of nasty hit pieces on China's healthcare system. Nathan Rich actually did a great video showing that the New York Times completely lied and mistranslated people and distorted the nature of the Chinese healthcare system. China's healthcare system, it's not the same in every area, but it's controlled by the state. You have to pay for it. Yeah, you have to pay for it. But people aren't losing their homes and houses because of healthcare. That's not happening. And it's controlled by the state. There's different, state-run healthcare corporations that have been set up. China's a huge country. 1 in 5 people in this world are Chinese. So to set up one national health service for a fifth of the human race is not not exactly the easiest thing to do. So there's a lot of companies that are joint ventures where they bring in private companies to facilitate this, but it's all directed by the state. Chinese healthcare is run by the state. There's a lot of private companies involved, and it's different in different regions. And yes, in a lot of places you do have to pay for it, right? But everyone gets it, right? You don't have, it's complicated, but you should check out Nathan Rich's piece. All right. Anything else before I go? Any other questions people want to ask me? If not, forever hold your question. If not, forever hold your question. Nothing wrong being a Marxist or socialist. I just don't understand. They are different to fascism. Okay. Don't know what that means. All righty. All right, folks. Anything else? Anything else? The clock is ticking. I'm going to finish my orange juice. The clock is ticking. Anything else, folks? Anything else before we end here? Okay. Is the USA doomed to rot? Is hope lost? Why compare Russia and China? Okay. USA doomed to rot. No, I don't think the USA is doomed to rot. I think there is a huge appetite for the kind of things we talk about on this live. I think, at the end of the day, the reason that millions of Americans were ready to vote for Bernie Sanders and then voted for Donald Trump is because they want a strong government that will fight for them. Can I hear your talks? I think the CIA, NSA, and FBI are on your back. Well, okay, we'll put that down. All right, CIA, NSA. China, Russia, compare. All right. So, is the USA doomed to rot? No. I think there's a huge audience of people who want a government that will fight for them. I think they want a strong government that will fight for them. They don't want chaos. They certainly don't want bigotry and impoverishment. They want a state that fights for working families. I've tried my hardest, and thank you, Herb Bryant. I've tried my hardest to popularize the slogan, we need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. I think millions of Americans want a government that will stick up for them against the rich and powerful, that will fight to rebuild the roads and crumbling infrastructure in their communities, to provide jobs to those who are unemployed, to rebuild our communities, to fight for a new America where the needs of the people come first. I think most people in America would want that. If the left could get itself together and start talking the way I talk and stop talking the way certain people talk, I think things could really improve. If we could get people to understand what socialism really is, if we could revive socialist populism, I think that the United States could very easily reemerge from all of this chaos. And the fact that, the anti-imperialist countries are getting richer, to most Americans, that's not a threat, right? At the end of the day, if China gets richer, we can do more business with China. We can make more money, right? If Iran gets richer, America can do business with Iran. We can make more money, right? If we had an economic setup that was not about, trying to beat down countries and dominate the world market for the monopolists, but was instead about win-win cooperation. It was about physical economy and building things. Third party, right? Okay, yeah, Nina Turner corner. All right, we could actually do something, and I think it's just a matter of building it. We have to get out there, and that's why I'm building the Center for Political Innovation. That's why I do these lives. Nobody talks the way we talk on here. Nobody does, because we have a very unique message. Socialism has become totally distorted, and we have to revive. How often do you buy notebooks? Yeah, that's one thing I have a lot of is notebooks. A lot of notebooks. All the time, and they're cheap too. I go to the dollar store, got lots of notebooks. But if people knew what we were talking about, we could very easily build. We could very easily build a new socialism. I think Americans would be ready for a real socialism, a populism that fights for working people, fights against capitalism and the rule of profits. All right, China and Russia, why compare? Yeah, both of those countries have risen up from poverty with state central planning, right? Now, Russia, in the 1990s, the free market was restored, but then it was with state central planning that they fixed the disaster that Yeltsin created. And in fact, Putin has studied Deng Xiaoping. Many people have pointed out that Deng Xiaoping and Deng Xiaoping's economic theories are a big impact on the economic model that Putin's Russia has developed. Putin has met with Deng Xiaoping's daughter, and that the economic programs Putin implemented were largely inspired by China's economic programs. Now, Russia's economy is centered around two gigantic state-controlled mega corporations, Gazprom and Rosneft. They make oil and natural gas. Whereas China's economy is centered around state-controlled manufacturers like Huawei Technologies, like the China Steel Manufacturing Associations, etc. So, but yes, in both countries, you have the state kind of at the center. You have a lot of capitalists, but the state kind of controls them. And, there are similarities between the two. And both of those countries were dirt poor until they had socialism. Until the Communist Party came to power in Russia, until the Communist Party came to power in China, those countries were dirt poor. Socialism made both of those countries into global superpowers. But socialism doesn't work, Caleb. It's failed everywhere it's ever been tried. Oh, yeah, and that's why Russia has never had a steel mill. Neither has China, right? They're just, if only they would just not have had socialism. These people, how can anyone say this? How can anyone say that with a straight face? Anybody. Socialism doesn't work. It never did anything. It just failed everywhere. Russia, China, oops. That should end the conversation right there. What was Russia like before 1917? What was Russia like by 1936? What was Russia like in 1960? What is Russia like today? Oh, okay. But socialism never accomplished anything. What was China like before 1949? What's China like today? Oh, but socialism and communism never accomplished anything, huh? It's like that. People say things without thinking about them. Russia and China became global superpowers with socialism. That's a fact. Cuba, a small island, became known all over the world because of what the socialist government did in terms of developing a healthcare system, in terms of literacy campaigns, etc. It was socialism that electrified Egypt with the Aswan Dam. It was socialism that had, the highest life expectancy on the African continent when Gaddafi, ran Libya with a state central planned socialist economy, built the world's largest irrigation system. The statement that socialism always failed and never accomplished anything is so wrong and so inaccurate. People should laugh at somebody who says that. If somebody says that, laugh at them. Laugh at them. China is still communist, though. China has a state centrally planned economy. It's called socialism with Chinese characteristics. All right. The CIA, NSA, FBI are watching me. Well, duh. Whatever. I'm not doing anything illegal. And I encourage people to not do anything illegal, right? Don't do anything illegal because, at the end of the day, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, I mean, you're going to be watched. And, yeah, don't do anything illegal. I'm not. I don't even drink alcohol at this point. I drank, in the past, but, a couple years ago, I just decided, what's the point of drinking alcohol? Never use drugs, And also, even though it is legal to do the whole Socialist Rifle Association thing, don't do that around me. I want nothing to do with any. If you're involved in some gun group or something, get the hell away from me. I don't want anything to do with that. I'm interested in building a think tank. I'm interested in engaging with people politically. I am not interested in doing anything that has anything to do with whatever, with, rifles or whatever, right? I'm not a gun owner. New York City, you can't be a gun owner. If you're doing the Socialist Rifle Association, Redneck Revolt, whatever, stay away from me because I'm not involved in any of that. And I am interested in promoting socialism. I don't even want to build a new party, I've talked about Russia extensively on other lives. I don't want to answer that last one, but well, I'll give you the answer I always give. All right, Russian. All right, but yeah, and at the end of the day, folks, right? We don't need left adventurism and terrorism. That's not going to create socialism. Violence is not going to create socialism. Socialism is going to be based on construction. It's about getting into communities, providing for people, building organizations, building networks of people, right? Educating people ideologically, providing people with the socialist ideology that's been missing. That's what's needed in our time. And left adventurism, look, if breaking shit, if going out and rioting and breaking shit would create socialism, we'd have it by now. I've never in my life seen as much rioting and breaking shit. And people are angry. People are very angry about the police state and police brutality and racism, and they are very justified in being angry. But if breaking shit, going out and breaking shit was going to make socialism, we would have socialism by now. Socialism, there's an ideological problem right now. There is an ideological problem, and I am trying to build a think tank to combat that ideological problem and correct it. We need a constructive socialism to save America from the disaster of capitalism and end the imperialist system. Alrighty. Do I see hope in this third party? Sure. Yeah, it sounds very exciting. The People's Party sounds very exciting. I'm excited to see what comes out of that. Jimmy Dore is involved in it. Cornel West, Nina Turner. I'm very excited about the People's Party. Looks excited. I would interview somebody from it. Great. I'm excited to hear about it. I think it's very exciting. The Bernie-crats are tired of the Democrats and they want to form a new party. Good for them. I'm interested in it. There you go. All right. Russia. Okay. Russia does not believe in communism anymore. And they're very clear about that. They do not, promote communism. They're Russian Orthodox, right? They are not, the Communist Party is a very important political party there, but it's not the ruling party. However, the Russian economy is largely centered around the state. It's centered around, Gazprom and Rosneft. Almost all the major industries are either nationalized or get a subsidy from the state. There's a lot of state central planning there. But no, they don't promote communism. They don't promote Marxism. They don't, right? They don't, right? That's just a fact. So, and I've been there and I've discussed this very issue with them. Putin is not a communist. The Russian government at this point, it is a Russian Orthodox Christian government. They are very critical of the Western system, but they also, they are not Marxists, and that's just the reality. So there you go. Okie dokie, folks. I think we're gonna cut it off there. So I will just conclude the way we always conclude. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Thanks, folks, and have a good night.